renowned forensic psychologist Dr. Evelyn Hart returns to her fog-shrouded hometown after a decade away, she's drawn into the investigation of a chilling murder that mirrors a series of unsolved crimes from her past. The local police are stumped, the community is on edge, and cryptic messages left at each crime scene seem to target Evelyn personally. Teaming up with a skeptical detective and an old friend with secrets of his own, Evelyn must race against time to unravel the killer's twisted game. As the body count rises and the clues grow more disturbing, she realizes the truth may be buried not only in the shadows of the town, but deep within her own memories. In a place where everyone hides something, can Evelyn uncover the real killer before she becomes the next victim? Chapter 1: The Haze of Home. Doctor. Evelyn Hart checked her watch, a sleek, no-nonsense piece of polished steel on her wrist. 4:58 p.m. She adjusted the stack of reports on her minimalist desk, aligning the edges with obsessive precision. The muted beige walls of her compact city office felt blessedly calm, a stark contrast to the chaotic minds she often navigated. A decade of distance, built carefully, deliberately, had given her this quiet, controlled space. She inhaled the scent of old paper and faint ozone from the air purifier, a familiar comfort. The sharp ring of her desk phone shattered the silence. It wasn't a number she recognized. Local area code, but not one she frequently dealt with professionally. Usually her cases came through established channels, referrals from state or federal agencies. Curiosity, a reflex honed over years of probing the darkest corners of the human psyche, nudged her to answer. Doctor. Hart, she answered, her voice level professional. A gruff, hesitant male voice replied. Dr. Hart, Sheriff Brody here, Blackwood Creek Police Department. Evelyn's posture stiffened imperceptibly. Blackwood Creek. The name itself felt heavy, a weight settling in her chest. It had been 10 years. 10 years since she'd driven away, headlights cutting through that ever-present fog, vowing never to look back. Sheriff Brody. She vaguely remembered a younger, less weary-sounding Brody from her teenage years, always overshadowed by the previous sheriff. Sheriff, she acknowledged, keeping her tone neutral. It's been a while. A long while, Dr. Hart. Listen, I wouldn't be calling, not after. Well, but we've got something here, something bad, something baffling. His voice was strained, bordering on desperate. Evelyn's mind immediately shifted into analytical mode. Baffling how, Sheriff? It's a murder. Unusual, nothing like we've ever seen in Blackwood Creek. And frankly, our resources are stretched thin. We're small, mostly deal with noise complaints and the occasional bar fight. There was a pause, a heavy silence stretching across the miles. We heard about your work. The profile you did on that case downstate last year. Remarkable. Saved him months, they said. He was buttering her up, appealing to her professional pride. Evelyn felt a flicker of irritation, then a deeper surge of unease. What kind of murder in Blackwood Creek would warrant calling her, a forensic psychologist specializing in complex, pattern-based violent crimes, after a decade of silence? Sheriff, my expertise is in criminal profiling and behavioral analysis, she stated calmly. Are you certain that's what you need? There are other, more local experts. We need you, Dr. Hart, specifically you. His voice dropped slightly. There are elements, something about this. It just feels wrong. And there were things left at the scene, things that, well, we think they might be connected to things from the past, things you might understand. The vague insinuation, the hint of connection to Blackwood Creek's buried history, and perhaps asterisk her buried history, sent a chill down Evelyn's spine. She gripped the receiver tighter, her knuckles turning white. Understanding things from Blackwood Creek's past was the last thing she wanted to do. That particular haze was best left undisturbed. Sheriff, I appreciate the call, but my schedule is quite full, and frankly, I haven't been back to Blackwood Creek in a decade for a reason. The words were out before she could fully censor them, blunt and honest. Brody sighed, a weary, defeated sound. I understand. Believe me, I do. But this feels like it's escalating, and nobody here knows what to do. The community's rattled. You grew up here, Dr. Hart. You know this place, even if you left it behind. Maybe that's what we need, an outside perspective that still remembers. The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Blackwood Creek remembered everything, whether you wanted it to or not. She imagined the town now, shrouded in its perpetual fog, the insular community turning inward, whispers replacing conversation. A baffling murder, things left at the scene, connection to the past. It was a toxic brew, one that threatened to pull her back into the very darkness she'd fought so hard to escape. But beneath the apprehension, beneath the decade of careful distance, a different feeling stirred. A sense of obligation, or perhaps a morbid curiosity, a psychologist's instinct recognizing a unique, horrifying puzzle. And that chilling implication that the things left might specifically resonate with her. "When would you need me?" she asked, the question surprising even herself. The reluctance was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but the pull, strong and undeniable, had won. Brody's voice lifted fractionally. "As soon as possible, Dr. Hart, the sooner the better." "All right, Sheriff, I'll make arrangements. I'll drive up tomorrow." "Thank you, Dr. Hart, truly will be waiting." Evelyn hung up the phone. The silence in her office now felt different, charged with the unwelcome intrusion of Blackwood Creek. She looked out the window at the city skyline, sharp and clear against the late afternoon sun. Soon, she would trade this clarity for the disorienting embrace of the fog. The drive felt longer than it should have. The familiar highway markers blurred as Evelyn pushed her car towards the coast, towards the valley where Blackwood Creek lay hidden. The sleek metal of her vehicle, a symbol of her carefully curated modern life, felt alien the closer she got to the old, wild edges of the world. As she neared the turnoff for Blackwood Creek, the air thickened. Not just with humidity from the nearby ocean, but with something heavier, something visible. The first tendrils of fog appeared, swirling gray fingers reaching across the road. She turned onto the smaller, winding county road, and the fog closed in, a dense, opaque curtain falling around her. It was the Blackwood Creek fog. She remembered it instantly. Not like city mist or coastal haze, which often had a direction, a movement. This fog seemed to possess a malevolent stillness, clinging to everything, muffling sound, distorting shapes. The world outside her headlights became a shifting, uncertain void. Trees lining the road became monstrous, ill-defined figures looming and receding. The scent was damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else, an old, stagnant smell. The road dipped, and the fog grew even thicker, visibility dropping to mere yards. She slowed to a crawl, her hands tight on the wheel. This wasn't just atmospheric, it was psychological warfare. The disorientation was profound, a physical manifestation of the town's ability to hide things, to make the familiar strange. It mirrored the haze that had always seemed to cling to her memories of this place, obscuring details, softening sharp edges she instinctively knew should be terrifyingly clear. A sign materialized abruptly out of the gray, Blackwood Creek Pop, 1758. The number hadn't changed in years. The sign was weathered, faded, a ghost in the mist. Entering the town limits felt less like arriving and more like being swallowed. She drove slowly through the outskirts. The few houses she could glimpse through the swirling mist looked shuttered, withdrawn. The air here felt heavier still, quiet to the point of oppression. There was a stillness that went beyond the fog, an unnatural hush as if the town itself were holding its breath. Nothing looked genuinely *new*. Buildings sagged, paint peeled, everything seemed coated in a layer of damp gray. It was a town suspended in time, preserved by the very fog that isolated it. The feeling of unease she'd felt on the phone intensified, solidifying into a cold dread that settled deep in her bones. Blackwood Creek hadn't changed. She had just forgotten how deeply unsettling it was. The Blackwood Creek Police Department was housed in a squat, brick building that looked like a repurposed bank or post office. It was small, perhaps 3 cars parked haphazardly outside. Evelyn parked her own car, the city vehicle looking out of place, and stepped out into the damp, chill air. The fog seemed to press in on the building itself. Inside, the air was warm, stale, and smelled faintly of old coffee and desperation. A single officer, young and looking bored, sat at a desk in the small lobby. He looked up, surprised, then a flicker of recognition crossed his face. News traveled fast, even through the fog. "Dr. Hart?" he asked, standing quickly. "Sheriff Brody's expecting you. Go on back." He pointed down a narrow hallway. Evelyn nodded, her professional demeanor firmly back in place. She walked down the hall, past a couple of cramped, linoleum-floored offices. Sheriff Brody's office was at the end of the hall. The door was open. He was sitting behind a large, cluttered desk, a manila folder open before him. He looked up as she appeared in the doorway. He was older than she remembered, his face lined and tired. His thinning hair was gray, and his shoulders slumped slightly under the weight of his uniform. He wore the weary expression of someone who'd seen too much of life's unpleasantness in a place ill-equipped to handle it. "Dr. Hart, thanks for coming. Didn't really think you would," Brody said, pushing himself up from the desk. He extended a hand. "Sheriff Brody." "Sheriff," Evelyn said, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, but his hand felt rough and calloused. "You said it was baffling." And that elements pointed to the past. Brody gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "Have a seat. Coffee's terrible, but it's hot." Evelyn declined the coffee and sat, placing her small briefcase on her lap. She opened it, taking out a notepad and pen, professional mode activated. "Okay, Sheriff, start from the beginning. Victim identity, time of death, location, cause of death, anything you can give me." Brody leaned back, rubbing his temples. He looked genuinely overwhelmed. "Victim is Peter Jenkins, lived just outside of town, found yesterday morning by a neighbor. Time of death, estimated sometime Sunday night. Cause, blunt force trauma, nasty business." "Location?" Evelyn asked, her pen poised. "His property, out near the edge of the Whispering Woods," Brody said, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Pretty isolated out there." Evelyn noted Whispering Woods, another familiar, slightly ominous place name from her past. Any signs of forced entry? "Robbery a motive?" Brody shook his head. "No forced entry, house wasn't ransacked, nothing obvious taken, doesn't seem like a robbery. So someone he knew? Maybe, maybe not." Brody hesitated, looking at the folder on his desk. "That's the baffling part, Dr. Hart, how he was killed. It was ritualistic almost, and like I said, things were left." "What kind of things?" Evelyn pressed, her voice calm but insistent. Brody picked up a photograph from the folder, studied it for a moment, then pushed it across the desk. This was at the scene, placed deliberately near the body. Evelyn picked up the photo. It was a small, crudely carved wooden bird, painted black. It looked old, weathered. Something about it prickled at her memory, vague and formless. It felt familiar in the worst way. "A carving?" she asked, looking up at Brody. "Yeah, there were others. Not the same, but similar." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Symbols drawn in, something dark around the body, and a message." Evelyn's gaze sharpened. "A message? What did it say?" Brody looked uncomfortable. He glanced down at the folder again. "It was cryptic, didn't make much sense to us." He hesitated again, clearly reluctant to share. This confirmed her initial assessment. Brody was wary, maybe resistant to revealing the full extent of his confusion or the unsettling nature of the evidence. He was a small-town sheriff out of his depth, perhaps embarrassed to admit it fully and possibly guarding the more sensitive details from the outsider. "Sheriff," Evelyn said, her tone firm but not aggressive, "my ability to help hinges entirely on having all the information. The symbols, the message, they could be key to understanding the perpetrator's motivation, their state of mind, their signature." Brody rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah, I know, it's just sensitive stuff." "The message, it mentioned the Haze, and coming home." Evelyn felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. The Haze, coming home, her return, the fog. Was this killer somehow aware of her, or was it a chilling coincidence, tapping into the very language she associated with Blackwood Creek? Did it mention anyone specifically? A name? Evelyn asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Brody shook his head. "No, just those phrases. The Haze, coming home." And the symbols looked like old symbols from around here. Stuff people used to talk about, old folklore, before it all faded away. Old folklore. Blackwood Creek was steeped in it, whispered tales passed down through generations, stories of the woods, the fog, things hidden. And the wooden carvings? Evelyn pressed, looking back at the photo of the black bird. "Are they significant?" Brody shrugged, looking lost. "Don't know. Nobody around here carves stuff like that anymore." Like the symbols feels old, like something from the past. Everything pointed back to the past, her past. "Sheriff, I'll need full access to the crime scene photos, the evidence logs, victimology details, everything you have," Evelyn stated. And I need to see the crime scene myself as soon as possible. Brody nodded slowly. Right. Yeah, okay, it's secured. We can arrange that tomorrow morning. For now, I figured you'd want to get settled. We reopened the old Blackwood estate for you. Evelyn felt her jaw clench. The old Blackwood estate, her childhood home, inherited after everything. She hadn't set foot in it in a decade. The thought of entering that house again sent a wave of nausea through her. The estate, she repeated, the words tight. Yeah, figured it was. Easier than a motel, more private. We had Mrs. Gable air it out a bit, turn the power back on. Brody seemed to miss or perhaps chose to ignore the sudden tension radiating from her. The keys are with her down on Elm Street, just the main house. The groundskeeper's cottage is still boarded up. Mrs. Gable, an old family acquaintance perhaps, another ghost from the past. Right, Evelyn said, managing a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. Thank you, Sheriff, I'll get those keys. She gathered her things, standing up. Brody rose with her. We're hoping you can shed some light on this, Dr. Hart. It's got everyone spooked. I'll do my best, Sheriff. Leaving the police station, Evelyn felt the oppressive weight of the town settle more heavily on her shoulders. The fog was thicker now that evening had fallen, shrouding the streetlights in fuzzy halos. She found Elm Street and Mrs. Gable's small, neat house. The old woman was kind, her eyes full of pity she didn't voice, handing over a heavy ring of old-fashioned keys and offering vague condolences about her return being under such circumstances. The drive to the old Blackwood estate was short but unnerving. The fog was absolute outside of the faint beam of her headlights. The estate lay on the very edge of town, bordering the whispering woods. The long, gravel driveway appeared suddenly out of the mist. Trees loomed on either side, their branches skeletal and dark in the fog. The house itself emerged like a specter. Large, Victorian-era, sprawling and dark. Even from the outside, she could see the signs of decay, peeling paint, sagging gutters, windows dark and blind. It looked less like a home and more like a tomb. It was exactly as she remembered, only more tired, more neglected. She fumbled with the heavy keys, the metal cold and unfamiliar in her hand. The front door groaned open, releasing a puff of cold, musty air. The smell hit her first, damp stone, dust, and the faint, lingering scent of decay. She stepped inside, pulling the door closed behind her. The darkness was profound, broken only by slivers of hazy light filtering through the fogged-up windows and the beam of her phone's flashlight. She found the light switch for the grand foyer. A single, bare bulb flickered to life high above, casting long, dancing shadows. Dust motes danced in the weak light. Everything was covered in a thick layer of gray dust, undisturbed for years. The air was heavy still. It felt like walking into a museum dedicated to a life she had abandoned. She walked through the silent rooms, the formal parlor, shrouded in dust sheets, the dining room, the table set for ghosts, the study, lined with books she hadn't read. Each step echoed in the silence, amplified by the empty space. The decay was everywhere. Water stains on the ceiling, peeling wallpaper, threadbare rugs. But beneath the decay, the house was perfectly preserved, a time capsule. In the drawing room, she found the old grand piano, its keys yellowed and warped. On the mantelpiece, a collection of porcelain figures, coated in dust. It was all exactly as it had been. She went upstairs, the grand staircase creaking under her weight. The bedrooms were similarly preserved in dust and disuse. Her own bedroom was at the back of the house, overlooking the start of the woods. Entering it, a fresh wave of cold dread washed over her. The room felt smaller, the shadows deeper. The familiar furniture was still there, the wooden desk by the window, the faded floral wallpaper, the built-in shelves filled with books she'd read 100 times. She ran her hand along the dusty surface of the desk. Her fingers traced an old carving she'd made as a child, a simple, lopsided heart. A surge of fragmented memories assailed her, the smell of wood polish, the sound of her own laughter, the feel of rough bark against her skin from climbing trees in the woods, and darker, more fragmented images, fleeting impressions she couldn't grasp. The air in the house felt thick, oppressive. It wasn't just dust and decay, it was the weight of history, of buried secrets. Every creak of the house settling, every gust of wind rattling a loose windowpane felt like a whisper from the past. Evelyn stood utterly isolated in the heavy silence, the house around her a tomb of buried memories. each dust-laden corner whispering the secrets she'd spent a decade trying to forget. The haze of Blackwood Creek wasn't just outside. It was inside her head, mingling the ghosts of her past with the chilling reality of the present, where her hometown was now a crime scene. She was a forensic psychologist trapped in her own most disturbing case, where the answers lay not just in the grim events unfolding outside, but in the very history she had fled. The distant hoot of the owl from the whispering woods felt less like nature's call and more like a summons. Tomorrow morning, Sheriff Brody would take her to the edge of those woods, to the place where the victim lay, a scene rumored to hold an echo from the town's dark, unsolved history, a history Evelyn had lived through. As darkness deepened, Evelyn knew one thing with terrifying clarity: the haze wasn't lifting. It was drawing her deeper in, promising that the coming day would unearth not just the killer's secrets, but her own. Chapter 2. An Unsettling Reflection. The oppressive silence of the Blackwood estate finally gave way to the gray light of a fog-choked morning, but the haze felt no less suffocating. True to his word, Sheriff Brody waited by her car, his face grim as they drove the short distance to the edge of the whispering woods. Uniformed officers and forensic tents broke the dense green and white, the ancient trees looming like silent, morbid sentinels over the scene. Stepping out into the biting damp air, Evelyn felt the familiar, heavy weight of Blackwood Creek press down, a stark and unsettling reflection of the darkness waiting within the woods. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, pine needles, and something metallic and coppery that even the fog couldn't entirely mask. Yellow police tape stretched taut between trees, creating a stark barrier against the brooding forest. Inside the perimeter, uniformed officers spoke in hushed tones, their breath pluming in the cold air. Forensics personnel, clad in white suits, moved with practiced efficiency, their movements strangely serene against the grim backdrop. Brody led her towards the heart of the scene, his worn boots crunching on fallen leaves and twigs. "Dr. Hart, appreciate you coming. It's bad." Evelyn nodded, her eyes already scanning the area. She took in the churned-up ground, the careful placement of marker flags by the forensics team. The edge of the woods here felt particularly isolated, the towering trees swallowing the light and amplifying the unsettling silence. Blackwood Creek's notorious fog clung low to the ground, weaving between the trunks like ghostly tendrils. "The body's just up ahead," Brody said, his voice low. "We've secured the immediate area, waiting for your take." As they approached, Evelyn saw the focus of the activity. A man lay sprawled on the forest floor, partially obscured by a thicket of ferns. Even from a distance, the scene was disturbing, but it was the asterisk way he lay, the unnatural angle of his limbs, that snagged something deep in Evelyn's memory. A cold dread began to prickle beneath her skin. She approached cautiously, her professional training kicking in, a shield against the encroaching horror. Brody gestured towards another figure, tall and lean, hunched over a notebook. "This is Detective Corbin. Miles, this is Dr. Evelyn Hart, the one I told you about." Detective Miles Corbin straightened, turning towards them. He was younger than Brody, perhaps late 30s, with sharp, observant eyes under a furrowed brow. His expression was neutral, bordering on weary impatience. He wore a practical, no-nonsense jacket, his posture conveying both competence and a clear lack of enthusiasm for this introduction. "Sheriff," Corbin acknowledged Brody with a curt nod. His gaze then shifted to Evelyn, a cool assessment in his eyes. "Dr. Hart, welcome to Blackwood Creek, under these circumstances." His tone wasn't overtly hostile, but the subtle emphasis on "under these circumstances" and the way his gaze lingered spoke volumes. He clearly wasn't thrilled about an outside consultant being brought in. "Detective Corbin," Evelyn replied, keeping her voice even, "thank you for having me." Corbin gave a noncommittal shrug. "Sheriff thinks your background might be helpful." He paused, letting the unspoken skepticism hang in the air. "Frankly, I deal with facts. Evidence, and understanding the motive, the why, can often illuminate the how," Evelyn said calmly, refusing to be drawn into his implicit challenge just yet. Her focus was already shifting back to the scene before them. Brody cleared his throat awkwardly. "All right, let's look." They moved closer to the victim. Peter Jenkins. Evelyn had seen the photo back at the station, but seeing the body here in the oppressive gloom of the woods was different. The blunt force trauma was evident, brutal. But it wasn't just the injuries that tightened the knot in Evelyn's stomach. It was the victim's pose. He lay on his back, arms splayed wide, one leg bent unnaturally. But more chillingly, small, carefully placed objects surrounded him. Scattered around the body were more of the crude, dark wooden carvings Brody had mentioned, grotesque, twisted shapes that looked vaguely like distorted animals or faces. And drawn in the dark substance, radiating outwards from the body like macabre spokes, were symbols. These weren't random. Evelyn recognized them. Ancient, local folklore symbols for protection, for warding off evil, but used here in a sickening, inverted context. Peter Jenkins, Brody confirmed unnecessarily. Found him early this morning by a hiker. Been here. Maybe since sometime yesterday afternoon or evening. Evelyn knelt down carefully, keeping a respectful distance, her eyes taking in every detail. The way the carvings were placed, almost like offerings or talismans, the deliberate nature of the symbols, the victim's posture, it was the pose. It was exactly, terrifyingly, like the description from the archived files. The Woodsman killings, decades ago. 3 victims found over 2 years, each positioned in the woods, surrounded by similar symbols and primitive carvings. The cases were never solved. They faded into town legend, a dark whisper Evelyn had tried hard to forget. The second victim, a young woman named Sarah Jenkins, her description matched this. The splayed limbs, the angle of the head, even the pattern of objects around her. A shiver, involuntary and deep, ran down Evelyn's spine. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a deliberate, chilling echo. The carvings, the symbols, Evelyn murmured, her voice tight, they're consistent. Consistent? Corbin's voice was sharp, skeptical. Consistent with what? Some local ghost story? Evelyn ignored the barb, her gaze fixed on the scene. Consistent with the unsolved homicides from the late 70s, the Woodsman killings. The victims were found posed like this, with similar items and symbols left behind. Corbin scoffed softly. Come on. That was 40 years ago, cold cases with no connection. Except now there's a connection, Evelyn countered, looking up at him, her eyes intense. This killer is recreating them, or perhaps continuing them. Corbin's jaw tightened. You think this is some kind of copycat based on old newspaper clippings? Or based on intimate knowledge, Evelyn said quietly. Her gaze swept over the scene again, searching, analyzing. This killer wasn't just mimicking, they were referencing something specific, something ingrained in the town's history, perhaps in their own past. The asterisk personal nature Brody had hinted at, the things left behind. An officer, a young woman with a serious expression, approached Brody holding an evidence bag. Sheriff, sir, we found this tucked into the victim's jacket pocket. It wasn't visible until we were starting to bag him. Brody took the bag, his brows furrowing. Inside was a small, folded piece of thick, aged parchment, stained and creased. Brody carefully unfolded it, holding it by the edges. Corbin leaned closer, his skepticism momentarily replaced by professional curiosity. Evelyn stepped nearer, her heart starting to pound with a sudden, inexplicable dread. Written on the parchment in shaky, dark ink was a short message. Brody read it aloud, his voice hushed. The Haze remembers. Welcome back to the woods, Evelyn. Did you think you could leave it all behind? Remember the whispering in the pines? The blood drained from Evelyn's face. Welcome back to the woods, Evelyn. It was addressed to her, by name. Corbin's head snapped up, his eyes fixing on Evelyn with sudden, sharp interest, no longer just skeptical but suspicious. Brody looked bewildered, then concerned. Evelyn? Brody asked. Why would? Evelyn barely heard him. The message, combined with the chilling echo of the Woodsman killings at her feet, slammed into her with the force of a physical blow. Remember the whispering in the pines, the whispering in the pines. The phrase echoed in the deepest, most locked-away chambers of her mind. It wasn't just a poetic flourish about the woods, it was a specific reference, something she hadn't thought about in decades, something from that night. A dizzying wave of disorientation washed over her. The fog seemed to swirl tighter, the looming trees pressing in. The metallic smell intensified. She saw it just for a flash, moonlight filtering through dense pine needles, the dark shapes of trees against a gray sky, a sound, A low, sibilant sound like wind through the branches, but wrong, like whispered words. Her breath hitched. She felt cold, colder than the biting damp air could explain. Her hands trembled slightly. The professional mask she wore felt fragile, ready to shatter. The killer knew about the Woodsman cases. They knew about her. And they knew something specific, something deeply buried about her connection to the woods, to those old, dark secrets. Dr. Hart? Corbin's voice cut through the haze, sharp and questioning. You know what that means? The whispering in the pines? Evelyn forced herself to take a steadying breath, willing the fragmented image and the panic back down. She had to maintain control. Not here, not in front of them. It sounds like a local phrase, she managed, her voice a little shaky despite her effort. A lie, it was a terrible, specific memory. Corbin didn't look convinced. His sharp gaze probed her face, searching for a tell. Doesn't sound like any local phrase I know, sounds personal. He was right, and the implication was clear. The killer wasn't some random psychopath. They were someone who knew Blackwood Creek, knew its dark history, and knew asterisk her asterisk. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was a confrontation. Back at the Blackwood Creek Police Department, the cramped, fluorescent-lit interview room felt stark and suffocating after the damp expanse of the woods. Evelyn sat across a scarred wooden table from Detective Corbin. Brody had excused himself to deal with logistics, leaving them alone to debrief the scene and the disturbing discovery. Corbin leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his expression guarded. All right, Dr. Hart. Let's talk about what we saw out there. His tone was neutral, but the undercurrent of skepticism was still present. The scene is meticulously staged, Evelyn began, her voice now steadier, the professional demeanor firmly back in place, though the tremor still lingered beneath the surface. The placement of the body, the specific symbols, the carvings, it's a deliberate reconstruction of the historical Woodsman killings. Specifically, the second victim, Sarah Jenkins. Corbin jotted something in his notebook. Reconstruction, or coincidence, a lot of local kids messing around with old town legends. Coincidence doesn't explain the precision, Evelyn stated. The angles, the types of carvings, the specific arrangement of symbols. This isn't casual imitation. This is detailed knowledge, either from the original perpetrator or someone who had access to the original crime scene photos, police reports. Or someone who was there. Corbin looked up, his eyes narrowing slightly. You've seen the original reports? I've reviewed the general case outlines in passing years ago, Evelyn lied smoothly, mentally adding archived files at the Historical Society to her immediate to-do list. The truth was, the details were etched in her memory from the impact they'd had on the town and on her even as a child. The level of detail here is striking. Okay, fine. Let's say it's connected, Corbin conceded grudgingly. That still doesn't explain the message. Welcome back to the woods, Evelyn. What's your history with the Woodsman cases? Evelyn met his gaze, her expression carefully blank. I grew up here. The cases were prominent when I was a child. They were part of the town's folklore, its fear. Like everyone who lived here then, I was aware of them. Aware or involved? Corbin pressed, his tone sharpening. He tapped the message, now sealed in an evidence bag, lying on the table. And the whispering in the pines? That doesn't sound like public knowledge. The phrase hammered at her again, the fragmented image, the chilling sound. She felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. Focus, Evelyn. It sounds evocative, she said, choosing her words carefully. Perhaps something the killer associated with the original crime scenes. Or maybe a reference to something from the time period, something only they would know. She desperately hoped he wouldn't push harder on that specific phrase. Corbin leaned forward, his skepticism warring with a professional instinct that told him there was more here. Dr. Hart, Sheriff Brody brought you in because of your expertise, but he also said you had history with Blackwood Creek. This message makes it sound like you have a very specific history. Are you withholding something? Evelyn hesitated for a fraction of a second. Admitting the full weight of her past connection, the triggered memories, the sheer personal terror the message instilled, felt like conceding defeat, like letting the killer win. But professional honesty, even with a skeptical detective, was paramount. And the cold reality was she was no longer just a consultant. She was a potential target, or at the very least, inextricably linked to the motive. I'm not withholding information relevant to the investigation, Evelyn said, choosing her words carefully. However, my history here is personal. Like many people who grew up in Blackwood Creek, I have memories tied to the town's past events. The Woodsman cases, they were a source of significant fear and trauma for the community at the time. For me, as a child, too. She didn't elaborate on why they were particularly traumatic for her, not yet. The whispered secret of that night remained locked away. She paused, gathering her thoughts, allowing herself a moment to process the raw fear the message had ignited, channeling it into analytical thought. What this message tells us, detective, is that the killer is not random. They have a connection to the past Woodsman killings, and they have a specific, personal connection to me. This isn't just about recreating a crime. It's a communication. A challenge? Corbin studied her face for a long moment, his expression unreadable. He clearly didn't fully trust her, but the logic of her analysis, the undeniable chilling fact of the personalized message, seemed to penetrate his skepticism. A challenge, he repeated slowly. So you think this killer knows you? The shaky ink wasn't just a chilling signature. It was a personal challenge etched onto Evelyn's soul, yanking her back into the very darkness she had fled. Blackwood Creek hadn't just welcomed her home. It had marked her, branded her as a player in a terrifying game that stretched back decades. The fear was a cold, hard knot in her stomach, a mirror reflecting not just the town's darkness, but the unsettling possibility that something in her own past, something buried deep within her childhood memories of this place, had made her the killer's chosen target. There was no escaping it now. The only way forward was into the haze, to confront the echoes of a past she couldn't remember clearly, but which had clearly remembered her. She would have to peel back the layers of silence and suspicion that clung to Blackwood Creek like the perpetual fog, searching for the truth in dusty archives and guarded conversations, knowing that every step taken towards understanding the killer's pattern would also bring her closer to the terrifying secret of why she, of all people, had been chosen to face this unsettling reflection of history. Chapter 3. Echoes in the Fog. The shaky ink of the message, the cruel personal address, still echoed in Evelyn's mind, a phantom chill colder than the perpetual fog clinging to Blackwood Creek. It was impossible to compartmentalize the terror, to separate the investigative puzzle from the knot of fear tightening in her stomach, but she had to try. Now, seated at a makeshift desk in the small, functional space the Blackwood Creek Police Department had allotted her, she spread out the grim evidence photos, the official report, and most importantly, the folded note from the victim's pocket. This wasn't just a crime scene. It was a deliberate communication, a challenge thrown down by someone with a horrifying understanding of the past, and now, a focus fixed unsettlingly on her. To understand the asterisk, she had to delve into the echoes hidden within the haze, starting with the chilling words addressed to her. Her temporary workspace was little more than a metal desk tucked into a corner of what looked like a converted storage room, smelling faintly of stale coffee and damp wool. Outside the single, grimy window, the fog pressed in, a gray, suffocating blanket. Evelyn ignored the claustrophobia creeping in and focused on the task. She laid out the evidence photos, wide shots of the clearing, close-ups of Peter Jenkins' body, the unnerving arrangement of crude wooden carvings, the symbols drawn in the dark, viscous substance. She picked up the photo of the black bird carving again, turning it over in her hand as if it might reveal its secrets. It was rough, amateurish, yet deliberately crafted. Detective Miles Corbin stood in the doorway, arms crossed, observing her with that same weary skepticism he'd displayed at the crime scene. He held a steaming mug of coffee, the rich aroma a stark contrast to the metallic scent that still seemed to cling to Evelyn's clothes. "Find anything interesting in the pictures, Doctor?" he asked, his tone clipped, bordering on sarcastic. Evelyn didn't look up immediately. She ran a finger over the photo of the symbols, tracing the unfamiliar yet disturbingly familiar lines. "This isn't just a murder scene, detective," she said, her voice low and steady, cutting through his thinly veiled impatience. "It's a message. Every element is placed with intent." She finally met his gaze, her sharp eyes locking onto his. "The body's position, the symbols, the carvings, they're not random. They're references." Corbin sighed, pushing off the doorframe and walking closer, though maintaining a clear professional distance. References to what? Local ghost stories, Sheriff Brody's woodsman theories. We deal in evidence, Dr. Hart, physical evidence. Means, motive, opportunity. The staging asterisk is asterisk evidence, Evelyn countered, picking up the report. The meticulous recreation of the Sarah Jenkins murder from decades ago. The inverted use of old local folklore symbols, taking something meant to ward off evil and using it to mark a grave. That tells us about the killer's motive, their psychology, their connection to the past. She tapped the photo of the symbols. And this substance, it's likely blood, given the color and viscosity, but not the victim's. It's part of the ritual. Corbin rubbed the back of his neck. A ritual? Look, I appreciate the theories asterisk, but we need forensics. We need fingerprints, DNA, a murder weapon. And while you're waiting for lab results that might not exist, this killer is clearly cautious. You ignore the screaming psychological profile? Evelyn's patience frayed slightly. This person has intimate knowledge of cold cases, possibly access to old police files or town archives. They are deliberate, calculating, and they are obsessed with these past events. This isn't a spontaneous crime, it's a carefully planned theatrical performance. She picked up the note addressed to her. The Haze remembers. Welcome back to the woods, Evelyn. Did you think you could leave it all behind? Remember the whispering in the pines? She held it out. And this is not just a reference to the past, it's a direct confrontation. He knows I'm here. He wants my attention. He's making this personal. Corbin took the note, handling it gingerly with gloved fingers. His expression, for a fleeting moment, softened from skepticism to something closer to concern, perhaps even suspicion directed at asterisk her. You still haven't explained what the whispering in the pines means to you, Dr. Hart. Evelyn's jaw tightened. The knot in her stomach twisted. It's a childhood memory, she said, choosing her words carefully, deliberately vague. Something associated with the woods. It's not relevant to the investigation's immediate steps. Not relevant? A voice screamed internally. It's the core of it, you coward. But she couldn't, wouldn't articulate it yet. Not to him, not to anyone. Everything is relevant when the killer is leaving you personal notes, Corbin said, his eyes narrowed. This isn't standard procedure, doctor. You have a history here. What is it? My history is why Sheriff Brody asked for my help, Evelyn said, standing up, needing space, needing to push past his interrogative gaze. I understand this town's undercurrents better than an outsider ever could. I know the folklore, the stories, the people's ingrained distrust of anyone digging into the past. This killer is using all of that. You need to accept that understanding the asterisk history is as crucial as processing the asterisk scene. The pattern isn't just a coincidence, it's the killer's signature, their identity. She walked towards the window, looking out at the fog. If we don't understand the pattern, the asterisk why behind this recreation, we won't catch him before he finishes his performance. She turned back to him, her voice firm. I need access to the original case files for the Woodsman killings. I need to look at the town archives. I need to understand what happened then because it's happening again now. Corbin was silent for a moment, studying her face. The resistance in his posture hadn't vanished, but a flicker of reluctant consideration crossed his features. He wasn't convinced, not entirely, but perhaps he was starting to see the edge of the rabbit hole she was pointing towards. All right, he said finally, slowly. Brody can probably get you access to the old files, the archives. You'll need to arrange that yourself. But don't expect miracles from dusty paper, Dr. Hart. We still need hard facts. The past asterisk is the hard fact guiding this killer, Evelyn murmured, though Corbin had already turned to leave. The door closed behind him, leaving her alone with the photos, the note, and the oppressive silence of the room, broken only by the distant sound of rain beginning to fall, mingling with the ever-present fog. She had made a small step, gaining reluctant access to the past. Now, she needed to face the town itself. Evelyn found herself drawn to the foggy Anchor pub later that afternoon. The police station felt stifling, and the idea of returning to the vast, empty silence of the old Blackwood estate was even worse. Brody had suggested it as a place to get a feel for the town, a suggestion Corbin had scoffed at. But Evelyn knew that psychology wasn't just in evidence photos and reports. It was in the atmosphere, the whispers, the collective tension of a community under duress. The pub lived up to its name. A faint, damp chill permeated the air even inside, mingling with the smell of stale beer, wood smoke, and fried food. It was dimly lit, the windows opaque with condensation from the fog outside, casting the interior in a perpetual twilight gloom. A smattering of locals sat at the bar or huddled in booths, their conversations hushed, faces turned inward. As the bell above the door announced her arrival, a noticeable ripple went through the room. Heads turned. Conversations stopped abruptly, replaced by a heavy, expectant silence. Eyes, wary and assessing, followed her as she made her way hesitantly towards the bar. She felt like an intruder, a spotlight shone into a dark, private corner. This was the Blackwood Creek welcome she remembered. Suspicious, insular, rooted in a deep-seated distrust of outsiders, and perhaps even more so, of those who had left and returned. She ordered a lukewarm cup of tea from the bartender, a stoic woman with gray streaks in her dark hair and eyes that held no warmth. As she waited, she overheard snippets. That Jenkins boy, just like before, thought it was over. The words were laced with fear, superstition, and a clear, collective desire for whatever was happening to simply go away. And Evelyn, by her presence, by stirring up the past, was seen as a catalyst, not a solution. Several patrons gave her pointed, resentful looks before turning back to their drinks, their backs stiff with disapproval. She found a small, unoccupied table in the corner, trying to make herself invisible while acutely aware that she was anything but. She sipped the tea, the bitterness mirroring the mood in the room. This palpable tension, this quiet hostility, it was a key piece of the puzzle. This community was built on secrets, on not talking, on letting the fog and the woods keep their own counsel. The killer knew this. They were exploiting it, using the town's own history and silence against it. Evelyn. Evelyn Hart, is that really you? The voice was warm, familiar, cutting through the oppressive atmosphere. Evelyn turned, her breath catching in her throat. Standing there, holding a pint of ale, was Thomas Miller. Tom. He looked older, of course. Lines fanned out from the corners of his kind eyes, and there was a touch of gray at his temples. But the warmth was still there, in his smile, in the way his face lit up with genuine surprise and pleasure. He was wearing a worn flannel shirt, his hands calloused, the hands of someone who worked outdoors. Tom, Evelyn breathed, a genuine smile finally touching her lips. Oh my God, Tom, it is asterisk me. He pulled out the chair opposite her and sat down without asking, his presence a small, unexpected comfort in the hostile room. Well, I'll be damned. Sheriff Brody mentioned you were back, consulting on, well, you know. But I didn't think I'd see you down here. He gestured around the pub with his chin. Not exactly your old stomping grounds. Needed a change of scenery from the station, Evelyn said, offering a slight, wry smile. And the estate is, a lot. Tom nodded, his expression softening with understanding. Yeah, that place. It's got ghosts of its own, doesn't it? A shadow flickered in his eyes, gone as quickly as it appeared. The unspoken history, the shared secrets, immediately asserting their presence between them. They hadn't just been friends as kids, they had been asterisk there for each other, through things they didn't speak of even then. Brody said you were doing well, Tom continued, shifting the subject slightly, though the topic of the murder hung heavy in the air. Forensic psychology, huh? Big city stuff. Trying to put it to use here, Evelyn replied, gesturing vaguely towards the town outside. It's different. Different doesn't even begin to cover it, Tom said, taking a long drink of his ale. He watched her over the rim of the glass, his eyes searching, assessing. Heard about Peter Jenkins. Rough business. Everyone's spooked. They seem more than spooked, Evelyn said, glancing around the room, noting how the volume of conversation had risen slightly now that they were talking, but the undertone of watchful silence remained. There's a lot of tension. Blackwood Creek tension, Tom chuckled mirthlessly. We perfected it. Anything that stirs up the dust, anything that makes people look too hard at what's buried, folks don't like it. And you, Evelyn Hart, coming back and getting involved in this, that's stirring up a whole hurricane of dust. His tone was light, but there was a serious warning beneath it. Evelyn recognized it immediately. Tom had always been perceptive, attuned to the town's subtle currents. You seem to understand it pretty well, she prompted gently. Anything specific I should be looking at, beyond what's obvious? Tom hesitated. He ran a hand through his hair. Obvious is rarely the answer here, Ev. Things get twisted, stories change, what people remember or choose to remember. He trailed off, taking another drink. The killer is recreating the Woodsman murders, Tom, Evelyn pressed, leaning forward slightly. Exact details. Positioning symbols. The one from decades ago, Sarah Jenkins. Tom grew still. His smile was gone. Yeah, I heard, on the news, spooky. He avoided her eyes, looking into his glass. Is there something about those cases, something people don't talk about, she asked. Something that wouldn't be in the official reports? He finally looked up, his gaze guarded. Blackwood Creek's full of things people don't talk about, Evelyn. You know that, some things. Some things stay in the woods. He paused, then added, Be careful, Ev, you always dug too deep. The conversation veered into safer, if strained, territory after that, catching up on mutual acquaintances, most still in town, rarely leaving, talking about the changes or lack thereof in Blackwood Creek. But the undercurrent of secrecy, of Tom holding back, was palpable. He knew things. Things connected to the town's past, perhaps to the Woodsman cases, maybe even to the whispering in the pines. But he wasn't ready to share them, not fully. Not yet. Their reunion was warm, yes, a connection to a life she'd thought buried, but it was also steeped in the same fog that clung to the town, thick with unsaid words and hidden depths. Leaving the relative warmth and noise of the pub, Evelyn headed towards the Blackwood Creek Historical Society and Archive, a small, unassuming building tucked away on a quiet side street. The fog had thickened further, swallowing the streetlights and reducing visibility to mere yards. Each step felt isolated, the damp air clinging to her skin. The town felt less like a community and more like a collection of isolated, watchful boxes, each one holding its secrets tight. The Historical Society was housed in an old brick building, its sign weathered and peeling. Inside, the air was dry and musty, smelling of old paper and time. A lone volunteer, a small, quiet woman named Agnes, looked up from behind a large wooden desk piled high with documents. Sheriff Brody must have called ahead, as Agnes nodded curtly when Evelyn introduced herself, gesturing towards a back room filled with shelves of binders and boxes. The Blackwood Creek Gazette archives are along that wall, Agnes said, her voice raspy. Records of local matters are over there. Her gaze lingered on Evelyn for a moment, not hostile but wary, another pair of eyes that had seen too much, that knew the cost of remembering. Evelyn thanked her and retreated into the archive room. It was a haven of quiet compared to the pub, but the silence was heavy with the weight of the past. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of light from a high window. She started with the newspapers, pulling out heavy bound volumes from the decades when the original Woodsman killings occurred. The reports were sensationalized, yet sparse on concrete details. Locals found murdered in or near the Whispering Woods. Brutal killings, method often unclear in the papers. The first victim, a hiker passing through. The second, Sarah Jenkins. Evelyn found the article about Sarah. The date, the location, a clearing near the edge of the woods, not far from the old Blackwood estate. The description of the scene was chillingly familiar. Crude figures carved from wood were found arranged around the body. Symbols of unknown origin were drawn in the earth. There were photos, too, grainy and black and white, but clear enough to show the disturbing layout, the specific types of carvings. The blackbird, unmistakably similar to the one found at Peter Jenkins' scene. She cross-referenced dates, victim profiles, locations. The third victim, a local trapper. The fourth, a young couple parked near the abandoned mill. Each case had its gruesome details, its own eerie staging. But the second victim, Sarah Jenkins, stood out. The level of detail in the recreation of her death for Peter Jenkins' body was beyond mere similarity. It was a deliberate copy. The specific carvings, the pattern of the symbols, the position of the body. It was all there in the dusty reports, mirroring the fresh crime scene photos she just left. The feeling of dread intensified with each article she read. This wasn't just a killer inspired by old crimes. This was someone reenacting them, following a script written decades ago. And the fact that the first asterisk victim of this new series was a Jenkins, killed in a scene mirroring the second asterisk victim of the old series. It felt like a deliberate, cruel inversion, a twisted echo. She found some older, less formal town records, mention of local folklore, of protective symbols used by early settlers against the darkness in the woods. The symbols found at the crime scenes were these same symbols, but drawn upside down or with elements added to corrupt their meaning. It was a desecration, a statement of power over something feared. Sitting there in the quiet archive, surrounded by the ghosts of paper and ink, Evelyn felt the pattern solidify. This wasn't random violence. It was a narrative, a horrific story being told again, chapter by bloody chapter. And someone had specifically written her into this new edition. She spent hours poring over the records, making notes, sketching the symbols, cross-referencing names and dates. The weight of the town's history settled on her shoulders, heavy and suffocating as the fog outside. Blackwood Creek hadn't moved on from these events. It had simply buried them, hoped the fog would keep them hidden. But the killer was pulling them back into the light, forcing everyone to remember. As the light outside faded completely, leaving the archive room in deep shadow except for the harsh glow of her desk lamp, Evelyn gathered her notes. She walked out, nodding to Agnes, who still sat at her desk, quiet and watchful. Stepping back out into the fog-choked evening, Evelyn felt the town's atmosphere shift again. It wasn't just wary now, it felt coiled, like something was tightening, waiting. Blackwood Creek held its secrets tight, but the killer moved through its history like a conductor, orchestrating a terrifying symphony of echoes. What Evelyn had seen and felt so far was merely the overture, a chilling demonstration of intent. The killer wasn't reacting. They were executing a deliberate plan, using the town's buried past as their weapon, each move a chilling mirror to crimes long cold, a blueprint for the horrors yet to unfold. The stage was set not just for the present, but for a confrontation rooted deep in the past. But Evelyn now understood, with a certainty that turned the evening chill into ice in her veins, that this wasn't just about Blackwood Creek's history anymore. It was about her history. The killer wasn't just challenging the town, they were challenging her, personally, drawing her into their twisted game with a precision that hinted at intimate knowledge. The echoes were growing louder, yes, but they were also growing sharper, more pointed, and she knew the killer was just waiting for the perfect moment to make their deadly game intensely, terrifyingly personal. Chapter 4. The game escalates. Just as Evelyn had feared, the killer didn't wait long. The chilling certainty that she was being drawn into a deeply personal game, a horrifying echo of Blackwood Creek's buried past intertwined with her own history, had settled over her like a shroud. Now, the sharp ring of the phone on her makeshift desk at the Blackwood Creek Police Department shattered the uneasy quiet of the morning, and Detective Corbin's urgent voice confirmed her dread. Another body had been found, and the stage for the killer's next act was set. The fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed overhead, doing little to dispel the persistent gloom that seeped in from the fog-laden morning outside. Evelyn sat at a small, cluttered desk crammed into a corner of the main office, surrounded by case files and the faint smell of stale coffee. She had been poring over the Peter Jenkins file again, comparing the blackbird carving and the corrupted symbols to the archived photographs of the Sarah Jenkins crime scene. The parallels were undeniable, precise in their macabre detail, but the *Y remained elusive, a gaping hole in the pattern. The shrill ring of the desk phone made her jump. She snatched the receiver, her heart already pounding. "Hart. Evelyn, it's Corbin." The detective's voice was clipped, urgent, devoid of its usual skepticism. "We've got another one." Evelyn's breath hitched. "Already?" "Less than 48 hours after Jenkins," Corbin confirmed grimly. "It's bad, Evelyn." "Real bad? Where?" she asked, grabbing a pen and notepad. "Out by the old mill, you know the place. Derelict concrete shell near the creek, edge of the woods, the old abandoned mill." Evelyn's mind instantly went back, not just a local landmark but a notorious spot. A place teenagers went to drink, to dare each other. And she recalled with a fresh wave of unease, it was whispered to be the site linked to another of the woodsman victims from decades ago, maybe the first or the third. The exact details were hazy, buried under layers of time and trauma, but the location alone sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't random. "Yes, I know it," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Are you sure?" "It fits," Corbin cut in, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "The staging, the feel of it, Sheriff Brody's already en route. Get yourself out here, Hart, fast." "On my way." She hung up, the silence of the station pressing in on her. Brody emerged from his office, pulling on a jacket, his face etched with exhaustion and dread. "You heard?" Evelyn nodded, rising from the desk. "The mill?" "Aye," Brody sighed, the sound heavy with the weight of the town's renewed terror. "God help us, it's starting again." The drive out to the mill was a blur of fog and anxiety. The familiar oppressive mist hung thick in the air, muffling sounds and reducing visibility to mere yards. It felt like driving through a physical manifestation of the town's secrets. The dirt road leading to the derelict structure was already cordoned off with fresh yellow tape. Emergency lights pulsed faintly through the haze, painting the air with an eerie, strobing glow. She parked behind Brody's cruiser and stepped out, the damp air biting at her face. The smell of damp earth and decay was strong here, mingled with something metallic and sickeningly sweet. Uniformed officers stood guard behind the tape, their faces grim. The structure of the old mill loomed through the fog, a skeletal ruin of concrete and rusted rebar against the backdrop of the encroaching whispering woods. The location itself was a mirror, echoing whispers of past horrors linked to this very spot. Evelyn ducked under the tape, joining Corbin, who stood near the entrance to the mill, talking quietly with the lead forensic technician. Corbin looked even more weary than usual, lines etched deep around his eyes. His gaze, when it met hers, held no trace of his earlier skepticism. Only grim acceptance and a flicker of something else: respect, necessity. "Thanks for getting here fast, Hart," he said, gesturing towards the mill's gaping maw. "In here." The interior of the mill was cold, damp, and smelled strongly of mildew and decay. Shattered windows allowed slivers of gray light to penetrate the gloom, illuminating dust motes dancing in the stagnant air. Debris, broken concrete, twisted metal, rotting wood littered the floor. And there, in the center of the main chamber, was the scene. It was another man. Lying on his back amidst the rubble, his limbs angled unnaturally, eyes staring blankly at the decaying ceiling. The forensic team worked carefully around the body, their movements precise and hushed. But the scene wasn't about the body itself, not entirely. It was about the arrangement. Just like Peter Jenkins, this victim was surrounded by carefully placed objects. Not blackbird carvings this time, but crude effigies carved from bone or ivory, twisted into grotesque humanoid shapes. And the symbols, drawn in the same dark, viscous substance as before, but different symbols, arranged in a circular pattern around the body. Evelyn felt a cold dread creep up her spine. These symbols, too, were familiar from the archives, corrupted versions of protective wards, specifically associated with rituals meant to bind or contain malevolent spirits. The bone effigies, they mirrored descriptions from the asterisk third woodsman victim seen, a man found near the mill, rumored to have been involved in something illicit. She knelt carefully, gloved hands hovering over the edge of the scene, taking in every detail. The victim's position wasn't identical to the Peter Jenkins case, but it was chillingly familiar in its own right, a pose described in the newspaper accounts of that third victim. This wasn't just asterisk like the Woodsman murders. This was a deliberate, specific recreation, scene by scene, victim by victim, following a ghastly historical blueprint. "Another recreation," she murmured, mostly to herself, but loud enough for Corbin to hear. "He's following a pattern." A sequence. Corbin knelt beside her, his gaze sharp, taking in her observations. Bone carvings this time, not the birds. The carvings, the symbols, the location, even the victim's pose. "It mirrors the third woodsman killing," Evelyn explained, her voice low and steady, the professional detachment a thin shield against the rising horror. "The man found here decades ago. This isn't random, Miles, it's a deliberate performance. He's working his way through the history." Miles Corbin didn't argue. He didn't scoff. He simply nodded, his eyes fixed on the macabre tableau. The sheer audacity, the precision of the staging was undeniable. Then the lead forensic tech called out, "Detective, there's something here," tucked into his shirt pocket. Evelyn's blood ran cold. Another message, addressed to her. She watched, heart pounding, as the tech carefully extracted a folded piece of paper, placing it into an evidence bag. Corbin took it, his expression grim. He held it up and Evelyn could see her name, penned in dark, precise letters through the clear plastic bag. "My God," she whispered. Corbin didn't open the bag further. He didn't need to. He just looked at Evelyn, his eyes holding a mixture of alarm and a dawning understanding of just how deeply personal this was for her. "Forensics will process it," he said, his voice quiet. "But it's addressed to you again. We need to know what's on it, Evelyn." Right now. They moved away from the immediate scene, towards the entrance of the mill where the air was slightly less heavy. Corbin carefully opened the evidence bag just enough to unfold the paper without touching it, holding it flat between his gloved fingers. Evelyn leaned in, her gaze fixed on the handwritten words. The words swam before her eyes for a moment, then snapped into sharp, terrifying focus. "The dust remembers. Did you think you could hide it all away, Evelyn? The floorboards groan for you. Go home, look closer. Find the ghost in the attic. The dust remembers. The floorboards groan. The ghost in the attic." Evelyn repeated the phrases aloud, her voice trembling slightly. It wasn't just cryptic folklore this time. It was specific, horrifyingly specific. It was about her house. The old Blackwood estate. "What does this mean?" Corbin asked, his voice sharper now, demanding answers as the personal connection escalated dramatically. "The dust, the floorboards, the attic." Evelyn stared at the message, her mind reeling. The decaying grandeur of her childhood home, the layers of dust covering everything, the loud, unsettling groans of the old floorboards underfoot, especially on the second floor, and the attic. She hadn't even been up to the attic since she returned. Not yet. The phrase "ghost in the attic" wasn't a known piece of local folklore, not that she remembered. It felt like something else, something personal. Something tied to a specific fear, a specific memory she had suppressed for years, tucked away in the dark, dusty corners of her mind, just like the secrets hidden in the house itself. A sudden, vivid flash of memory. Darkness. Dust motes dancing in a single shaft of light. Whispering sounds. A feeling of being trapped, of not being alone. She visibly flinched, pressing a hand against her chest as if to still her frantically beating heart. The message wasn't just a taunt. It was a directive. A challenge. He wasn't just recreating the town's history, he was dragging her asterisk history, her buried trauma into the light. "It's about my house," she managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. "The estate. The old Blackwood estate." Corbin's eyes narrowed, understanding dawning on his face. The first victim near her property, the first message mentioning coming home, and now this. "He's pointing you, back there." "He's telling me to look," Evelyn confirmed, her gaze fixed on the paper. "He thinks something is there, something I missed, something I hid." The professional mask she so carefully maintained was cracking, revealing the fear and the raw, terrifying truth. The killer wasn't just aware of her connection to Blackwood Creek. He knew things about her past, about her home, things that felt too specific, too intimate to be mere coincidence or public knowledge. "This changes things," Corbin stated, the obvious understatement hanging heavy in the air. "He's not just playing with the town's past, he's playing with yours." The dread intensified, solidifying into a cold, hard knot in her stomach. The game wasn't just escalating, it had become terrifyingly, intimately personal. Back at the police station, the sterile environment offered little comfort. The weight of the second message hung between Evelyn and Corbin as they gathered in the small conference room, the table littered with crime scene photos and files from the Woodsman cases. Sheriff Brody sat off to the side, listening intently, his face a mask of weary concern. "Okay, let's lay it out," Corbin said, pushing a map of Blackwood Creek towards the center of the table. "Peter Jenkins. Found near the edge of the woods, close to your place, Evelyn. Staging matches Sarah Jenkins, victim number 2 from the 78 series." He pointed to a spot on the map near the old estate. "Now this new victim, the mill. Staging matches the third victim from 78, found near the mill." He pointed to a spot near the derelict structure by the creek. Evelyn leaned forward, tracing lines between the locations on the map, then to the names in the old case files. "He's not just copying," she said, articulating the pattern she'd recognized at the mill. "He's following a script, a sequence. Sarah Jenkins was the second victim in 78, This new victim matches the third. Peter Jenkins was the first victim now. Does that mean he started with victim 2 from the past, then moved to victim 3? Corbin frowned, considering. Why skip the first one? Who was the first victim in 78? Brody spoke up. That was Thomas Albright. Found out near the Whispering Woods trailhead. Brutalized, different MO than the others initially, but later linked by the symbols and carvings found at the scene. Different MO? Evelyn asked, making a note. Yeah, Brody confirmed. He was ripped apart, not blunt force like Sarah or the others. Something more primal, though the carvings started showing up then. Evelyn absorbed this. A potential deviation in the original sequence. Or was the killer saving that particular, more brutal MO for later? For whom? So, Corbin picked up the thread. First victim now matches past victim 2. Second victim now matches past victim 3. He's working his way through the list. But why start with number 2? And what about number 1? Perhaps the order is significant to him for a reason we don't understand yet, Evelyn suggested. Or maybe he's building up to the most significant one for last. The first woodsman victim might be the culmination, not the beginning, of his modern sequence. They continued to map the connections, spreading out photos and files. The victims in 78, Thomas Albright, Woods Trailhead, Sarah Jenkins, Woods Near Estate, third victim, Mill, and there were others listed, found at different locations around Blackwood Creek. The current victims mirrored specific past ones with unnerving accuracy. Corbin was watching Evelyn closely now, his earlier dismissiveness entirely gone. Your read on this, the staging, the symbols, it being a performance, you were right, more right than I wanted to believe. He gestured to the map and files. This isn't random, it's planned, meticulous, and the messages, they're taunts, directing you, challenging you. He wants me involved, Evelyn stated, the truth heavy on her tongue. He's making it impossible for me to stay detached. He's drawing me in, using the town's history and my own past as bait. But why? Corbin slammed a hand lightly on the table in frustration. Why recreate these specific murders? What's the motive behind this historical cosplay? It's not about robbery, it's not a crime of passion that fits the pattern. Why Evelyn? Why now? He feels a connection to the past cases, Evelyn theorized, pushing back a stray strand of hair. Perhaps he was involved. Perhaps he was a child then, impacted by the events. Or maybe he simply feels a sense of ownership over the town's dark history, seeing himself as its curator, its archivist. Recreating these acts could be a way of reclaiming that history, asserting control. And he sees me as a challenge to that control. I came back, I'm a psychologist who understands patterns. I'm linked to the town and maybe even the original events in some way he knows about. I'm the perfect audience or perhaps the perfect final player. An archivist, Corbin mused, someone obsessed with the past, someone who sees it as a script to be followed. Exactly, Evelyn confirmed, and he's making sure I'm reading along. She looked down at the photograph of the second message, the words, "Go home, look closer, find the ghost in the attic," burning into her mind. He's actively trying to pull secrets out of *me*. Not just the town. The conversation shifted then to logistics, to potential leads, to the sheer impossibility of covering every significant location in Blackwood Creek tied to the Woodsman cases. The list of possible future crime scenes felt terrifyingly long. But the core understanding had solidified. They were hunting someone who was meticulously recreating history and whose primary target, audience, and focus was Evelyn herself. The professional distance Corbin had initially insisted upon was gone, replaced by a grudging, necessary partnership built on the shared realization of the gravity and the personal danger of the situation. They had a pattern. They had a motive of sorts, obsession with the past, targeting Evelyn, but they still had no who. The fog had thickened by the time Evelyn returned to the old Blackwood estate. The house loomed out of the mist like a forgotten relic, dark and imposing. Each step up the creaking front porch felt heavier than the last. The message from the mill echoed in her mind, "The dust remembers. The floorboards groan for you. Go home. Look closer. Find the ghost in the attic." She unlocked the front door, the sound echoing in the cavernous hall. The air inside was cold and still, carrying the faint, pervasive scent of decay and dust. She stood in the entryway, listening to the silence, acutely aware of being alone, of being watched. The killer knew this house. He knew it well enough to reference the dust, the groaning floorboards, the attic. Had he been inside? Was he there now? The thought sent a fresh wave of panic through her. She walked slowly through the downstairs, past the dusty, sheet-draped furniture, the faded portraits on the walls. The floorboards' asterisk did groan under her weight, mournful sounds in the oppressive quiet. Each creak seemed amplified, a deliberate accusation. The dust remembers. She ran a finger along a dusty surface. Memories were buried here under layers of time and neglect, just like the dust. Memories she had worked so hard to forget, to wall off. The phrase, ghost in the attic. What did that mean? Was it a literal ghost? A symbolic one? A memory? A person? She found herself standing at the foot of the grand, sweeping staircase, her gaze drawn upwards towards the shadows of the second floor, and beyond, towards the narrow, dark opening in the ceiling that led to the attic. She hadn't ascended those stairs since she arrived. Not fully. The thought of the attic, hidden away under the roof, filled with who knew what relics of the past, felt suddenly terrifying. The killer was telling her to go up there, to look closer. What did he think she would find? What secret was he convinced was hidden there, waiting for her to uncover? Was it something about the woodsman cases? Something about her own past that she had suppressed? The fog outside mirrored the one settling in her mind. The ghost in the attic wasn't just a symbol, it was an instruction. The killer wasn't just hunting her, he was guiding her, forcing her hand. He wanted her to dig, not just through dusty attics, but through the buried layers of Blackwood Creek itself, through the soil where the town's secrets lay restless. He wanted her to unearth whatever darkness had first seeded this place, whatever had spurred the original terror decades ago. And with a sickening certainty, Evelyn knew he wanted her to find it, the core, the connection, the link to her own history, because only then would his twisted game reach its horrifying crescendo. There was no turning away now. The path led into the past, into the archives of forgotten grievances and suppressed truths, into the reluctant memories of those who had lived through it before. It meant disturbing the dead, figuratively and perhaps literally, by forcing secrets into the light. It meant confronting the town, confronting others, and most terrifyingly, confronting herself and whatever lay hidden not just in the house's shadows, but in the locked rooms of her own mind. The next move was hers, and it was a descent into the dark heart of Blackwood Creek's history, where the truth of the present nightmare lay waiting, buried like bones. Chapter 5: Digging Up Graves. The fog lingered outside, a physical manifestation of the town's murky past, but inside the Blackwood Creek Historical Society, the air was thick with the dust of decades. Evelyn hadn't gone home to the attic first. The killer's instruction felt less like a directive and more like a lure, meant to pull her into a confrontation she wasn't ready for alone. Instead, guided by Corbin and the chilling certainty that the present nightmare was a recreation of the past, they began the grim work of sifting through brittle newspapers, faded town records, and bound volumes of forgotten grievances. This wasn't just research. It was the metaphorical act of digging up graves, seeking the long-buried secrets the killer believed held the key to this twisted game. The Blackwood Creek Historical Society occupied the upper floor of the old town hall, a space that felt less like a curated archive and more like a repository for things the town collectively wanted to forget. Dust motes danced in the weak light filtering through tall, grimy windows, illuminating shelves stacked precariously with sagging cardboard boxes, leather-bound ledgers, and rolled-up maps brittle with age. The air tasted of paper decay and stale secrets. Evelyn and Corbin had been there for 3 days, returning after the second body was found. The sense of urgency was a constant hum beneath the quiet reverence of the place. Mrs. Gable, the town clerk who doubled as the Historical Society's sole, perpetually overwhelmed attendant, had given them reluctant access, hovering nervously before retreating to her downstairs office, leaving them alone with the ghosts. "Anything?" Corbin asked, running a hand through his tired-looking hair. He was hunched over a stack of Blackwood Creek Gazette issues from the late 1970s, his brow furrowed in concentration. The skepticism in his demeanor had softened since the second message, replaced by a grim determination. He still relied on facts and evidence, but now, the historical record was the evidence. Evelyn didn't look up from the enormous, handwritten ledger she was poring over, its pages filled with elegant, spidery script detailing town council minutes from 1977 and 1978. Patterns, maybe. Lots of reports about petty crime, stray animals, and then a sudden spike in complaints about vandalism near the Whispering Woods. Mention of unsettling disturbances, but no details. She tapped a line with her pen. February 1978, just before Sarah Jenkins was found. Corbin slid a brittle newspaper page across the table. Here the Gazette's report on the first woodsman victim. Markham, found early March 78. Then Sarah Jenkins, late March. Third victim, Davis, mid-April. He pointed to an article from May. And then, nothing, just stops. Like the town held its breath, then collectively exhaled and decided it was over. Or decided to bury it, Evelyn murmured. She flipped back through the ledger, finding the pages after the third murder. The minutes abruptly shifted focus to trivial matters, budgeting for road repairs, debate over a new town sign. No mention of the ongoing investigation, no public safety concerns recorded, not even a formal acknowledgement of the tragedies that had gripped the small community just weeks before. "Look at this," Evelyn said, pushing the ledger towards him. "This gap. After the third victim, the official record goes silent. No emergency meetings, no discussion of the investigation, nothing. It's like they scrubbed it." Corbin leaned closer, his gaze sharp. "That's deliberate." What were they hiding? They spent the rest of the day and the next buried in the archives, tracing faint threads. Old property records revealed land disputes, significant ones involving families whose names vaguely resonated with the victim list, though not directly. They found mention of a controversial logging operation proposed for the Whispering Woods in the late 70s, fiercely opposed by a faction of townsfolk who considered the woods sacred or historically significant. It had been mysteriously abandoned shortly after the woodsman killings began. They interviewed Mrs. Gable again, pressing her gently about the late 70s. She became visibly uncomfortable, her hands fluttering. "Oh, those were difficult times," she'd said, her voice barely a whisper. "Nobody talked about it, not really. You didn't ask too many questions back then." When pressed further about why nobody talked, she'd only shake her head. "Some things are best left buried, Dr. Hart. For the town's sake, for everyone's sake." Her reluctance was palpable, mirroring the silence in the records. Evelyn also managed to track down a few elderly residents who had lived through the era. Most offered only platitudes, a dark time. Everyone was scared. The fog seemed thicker back then. One old man, a former logger named Silas Croft, had grudgingly agreed to speak. Sitting on his porch, wrapped in a thick blanket despite the mild, damp air, he'd stared out towards the woods. The woodsman wasn't just some drifter, he'd rasped, his eyes cloudy with age and memory. This town, it had a sickness long before he came. He just brought it to the surface. There were things folks did, buried deep. He was just digging 'em up. He wouldn't elaborate, only muttering about old ways and debts paid in blood, leaving Evelyn with more questions than answers. The research was frustratingly piecemeal, but a picture began to emerge. A town with deep-seated conflicts, possibly tied to the land or ancient traditions, that had erupted violently in the late 70s. A series of murders, orchestrated like dark rituals, and a swift, determined effort by the community leadership to suppress the truth, burying the incident under layers of silence and carefully curated history. The killer wasn't just recreating the woodsman murders, they were exposing the town's complicity in covering it up. And the cryptic messages, especially the ones about the haze and digging, felt increasingly pointed, not just at Evelyn, but at the town itself. As the damp chill of evening seeped into the archives, Evelyn closed a ledger with a sigh. They weren't just protecting themselves from a killer, Miles, they were protecting a secret. Corbin nodded, rubbing his temples. A secret someone is now forcing them to confront. He looked at Evelyn, his expression grim. "And they think you're the key." Evelyn found Tom Miller at the Foggy Anchor pub that evening. The air inside was warmer than the archives, thick with the smell of stale beer, fried food, and damp wool. Hushed conversations ceased as she entered, eyes tracking her across the room before returning to their drinks, though the undercurrent of scrutiny remained. Tom was sitting at a corner table, nursing a dark beer, looking weary. He offered a small, genuine smile that felt like a lifeline in the hostile environment. "Hey, Ev, didn't expect to see you here." Evelyn slid into the seat opposite him. "We need to talk, Tom, somewhere quiet if that's possible in this town." He hesitated, glancing around. "Everything okay?" "No, Tom, it's not. We've been at the archives, digging into the Woodsman cases. And the town records from that time, they're deliberately sparse. Things were happening, big things, that the town council actively buried." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "The killer knows this. They're recreating the murders as some kind of twisted history lesson, or maybe a punishment, and they keep leaving messages for me." Tom's smile faded, replaced by a guarded look she recognized from his reaction when she'd first mentioned the woodsman. "Messages? Personal messages. Things about the woods, about my home, and they're tied to the past. Tom, the killings aren't random. They're following a blueprint, and the blueprint is the town's suppressed history." She paused, meeting his gaze directly. "You grew up here. You lived through it, even if you were young. You know this town, its secrets, better than anyone. You said things were whispered about. What exactly was being whispered?" He looked away, picking at the condensation on his glass. "Evelyn, I told you, this town doesn't like outsiders digging. Doesn't like anyone digging, really. I'm not an outsider, Tom. I'm from here, and the killer is making it very clear they know that. This is personal for them, and they're making it personal for me. We found evidence of a major land dispute, maybe related to the woods around the time of the murders. Talk of old ways and things buried. Silas Croft mentioned debts paid in blood. What is it, Tom?" "What did the town hide?" Tom was quiet for a long moment. The low hum of conversation in the pub seemed to amplify the silence between them. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, strained. "It wasn't just a land dispute, Ev, not really. There were two families, old families, the Markhams and the Davies." Evelyn's blood ran cold. Markham and Davis, the first and third woodsman victims. "They were always feuding," Tom continued, his eyes fixed on some distant point. "Land, logging rights, some old grievance going back generations. But in '78, it escalated. There was talk of a ritual, something the Markhams were doing on their land in the woods, tied to some old town founding tradition, maybe warding off bad luck. The Davies clan thought it was a curse on their property, interfering with their plans for logging. There was a confrontation. It went bad." He took a shaky breath. "Old man Markham, Mark Markham Sr., the father of the first victim, he was found beaten badly near the woods boundary. Never fully recovered. The Davies swore it wasn't them, but everyone knew. The sheriff then, Brody's predecessor, he tried to investigate, but the town council, they shut it down. Said it was an accident. Covered it up. Said the town needed peace, not a blood feud." Evelyn leaned closer. "And the woodsman murders? That's where it gets murky." After the cover-up, the killings started. Markham first. Then Sarah Jenkins, her family was loosely tied to the Davies side through marriage, then Davis. It felt like retaliation, or maybe someone trying to expose the cover-up through violence. Tom finally met her eyes, and she saw the burden he carried there. "My grandfather, he was on the town council back then. He was one of the loudest voices for burying it. For protecting the town's reputation, he called it." He paused, his gaze dropping again. "And Sarah Jenkins, she wasn't just loosely tied to the Davies by marriage. She was seeing one of the Davies boys, secretly, and she knew about the confrontation. She saw something that night old man Markham was attacked. My grandfather, he knew she knew. He told her to keep quiet, for the town's sake." Evelyn felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp air. So, the town covered up an assault, possibly attempted murder, connected to a family feud and old traditions. And one of the woodsman victims saw it and was silenced? Tom nodded slowly. Silenced by the town's pressure to keep quiet, and then killed by the woodsman. It's always felt like the town was responsible somehow, that the cover-up asterisk caused the murders, or at least allowed them to happen without real investigation. It's the town's original sin, Evelyn. And my family was part of burying it. The confession hung heavy in the air. Tom's secret wasn't just about knowing something. It was about his family's direct complicity in the initial cover-up that preceded the very murders they were now investigating. It explained the town's insular silence and resistance, and it complicated everything. Back at the police station, the overhead fluorescents hummed relentlessly, cutting through the residual fog outside. Evelyn and Corbin were spread out across a table in the cramped conference room, surrounded by crime scene photos, sketches of symbols, copies of the cryptic messages, and stacks of notes taken from the archives. "So, let's put it together," Corbin said, tapping a map of Blackwood Creek that showed the locations of the Woodsman murders and the current ones. Archives show deep-seated family feuds, particularly between the Markhams and Davies, escalating into a physical confrontation in Feb 78 over land and old practices. A confrontation the town council, including Tom Miller's grandfather, covered up. "Yes," Evelyn confirmed, running a finger over the dates on her notepad. "Old man Markham is assaulted. The council records go silent." Then, March 1978, the Woodsman killings start. Mark Markham, Sarah Jenkins, David Davis. Corbin added, current victims, Peter Jenkins, found near the woods, recreated Sarah Jenkins' scene. Second victim, found at the abandoned mill, recreated David Davis' scene. And Tom's secret, Evelyn said, the weight of it still heavy on her. Sarah Jenkins witnessed the attack on Old Man Markham. Tom's grandfather knew, she witnessed it, and pressured her to stay silent as part of the cover-up. Then she became the second victim. Corbin looked thoughtful. So the pattern isn't just where asterisk and how the victims were found, but who asterisk they were and their connection to the central secret. The killer isn't just recreating the murders, they're highlighting the individuals involved in the initial conflict and the subsequent cover-up. Peter Jenkins, any relation to Sarah? Tom wasn't sure, Evelyn replied. Jenkins is a common name. Could be a coincidence or a distant relation. And the second victim, Corbin checked his notes. His name was Robert Sterling. Any connection to the Markhams or Davies, or anyone on the council cover-up side? Evelyn shook her head. Nothing obvious came up in the initial sweeps, but maybe his connection is more subtle. Or maybe the killer is moving beyond the primary players to those peripherally involved, or even their descendants. The pieces were starting to connect, forming a horrifying mosaic of past violence and deliberate suppression. The motive seemed increasingly clear. Someone obsessed with the town's buried history, determined to expose it, perhaps even punish those responsible or their descendants. The Woodsman killings were the eruption, the cover-up was the deliberate act of burying the evidence and the truth, and the current murders were the act of digging up the graves, metaphorically and perhaps literally. The symbols, the carvings, they all tie back to local folklore, protective wards, things associated with the woods and the land, Evelyn mused. Using them in inverted ways. It's like they're saying the protections failed or were twisted by the town's actions. Corbin nodded, his gaze fixed on the timeline of events. And the messages to you. The Haze remembers, welcome back. The dust remembers, go home, look closer, find the ghost in the attic. Why you're home? Evelyn wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the familiar chill creep in. The killer sees me as connected. To the past, maybe to the estate. The estate borders the woods, it's one of the oldest properties. Maybe they think my family was involved somehow. Or maybe they think I specifically have something from that time. Something they want found. The ghost in the attic, Corbin repeated, the phrase hanging in the air. They specifically directed you there. Evelyn had avoided it, focusing on the town's history first. But the killer's insistence, coupled with the mounting evidence of the past's grip on the present, meant she couldn't avoid it any longer. Her childhood home, the place she had fled, was not just a passive setting. It was an active participant in this deadly narrative. It's time I went home, she said, the words heavy with dread and resignation. And looked closer. The old Blackwood estate welcomed Evelyn with its usual oppressive silence, broken only by the creaks and groans of the ancient house settling around her. The fog outside had thickened again, pressing against the window panes, making the rooms feel even more isolated and tomb-like. The message, go home, look closer, find the ghost in the attic, echoed in her mind. The attic, a place of forgotten things, dusty corners, and childhood fears. She climbed the main staircase, the wood groaning under her weight, a sound that felt accusatory. The second floor was a maze of darkened rooms, each holding fragmented, unsettling memories. She bypassed them, heading for the narrow, often-avoided staircase that led to the attic. The air grew colder, heavier, as she ascended. The attic door was ajar, a sliver of blackness beckoning her. She pushed it open slowly. The space was vast, filled with the hulking shapes of shrouded furniture, stacks of old boxes, and the smell of decay and mothballs. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, casting long, dancing shadows that made the forgotten object seem menacing. Where to start? The message was cryptic. Find the ghost. Was it a person, a memory, an object? Given the killer's focus on history and tangible links, it was most likely an object imbued with meaning. She moved through the attic, her breath misting in the cold air. She opened boxes filled with moth-eaten clothes, faded linens, broken toys. Nothing felt significant, nothing resonated with the grim history she had spent days uncovering. The house seemed to mock her search, holding its secrets tight. Then, tucked away in a corner behind a large, dusty armoire, she saw a small, wooden chest. It wasn't ornate, just a simple box, but it was distinct from the cardboard chaos surrounding it. It looked like it had been deliberately placed there, hidden. Her heart pounding, Evelyn pulled it out. It was heavy, locked. She searched around, her fingers tracing the rough wood. There was no keyhole she could pick. She tried the clasp, but it held fast. Frustrated, she looked closer. On the lid, faintly etched into the wood, was a small, stylized symbol, a twisted knot with a line through it. It was one of the symbols she had seen in the archives. A protective ward, corrupted, inverted. Just like the symbols at the crime scenes, this wasn't random. This was connected. She had to get it open. She found a loose floorboard nearby and used a piece of splintered wood like a lever, jamming it into the gap around the chest's lid, pushing with all her might. The old wood protested, but with a final, sharp crack, the lid gave way. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed tissue paper, lay a collection of objects. A child's faded ribbon, a few smooth stones, and a small, bound journal, its cover plain and unassuming. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the journal. It felt brittle, ancient. She opened it carefully. The pages were filled with looping, childish handwriting. It was dated 1978, her own handwriting. This wasn't her adult journal. This was her childhood diary, the one she thought she had lost or destroyed, the one from the year everything changed. She flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the innocent entries about school, friends, the weather. And then, tucked towards the middle, she found something else. A folded piece of paper, slipped between two pages. It was a drawing done in crayon. Crude, childlike, it depicted stick figures near trees, one figure lying down, others standing over it. And in the corner of the drawing, a familiar shape, a small wooden bird carving, exactly like the one found at Peter Jenkins' scene, the one matching the description from the original Sarah Jenkins scene. Beneath the drawing, scrawled in her childish hand, were a few words. The man fell down in the trees. The birds watched, heard the whispering in the pines, the terrifying phrase from the killer's first message to her. The memory fragment that had frozen her at the second crime scene. It wasn't just a memory. It was a childhood observation, recorded and then buried, physically and emotionally. The man who fell in the trees, Old Man Markham, the attack Tom described. Had she, as a child, seen something near the woods, something related to the initial conflict? And the bird carving, was it left there then? Or was it something she drew from memory later? The journal in her hands wasn't just an object. It was a key. A key unlocking her own buried memories, yes, but more terrifyingly, a key to understanding the chilling design behind the Woodsman murders, past and present. The killer wasn't merely mimicking history. They were meticulously following a template, a horrific blueprint laid out decades ago, and Evelyn's fragile childhood memory held one of its most critical pieces. The archivist knew she possessed this link, this direct line to their motive, and the realization settled over her with the weight of a tombstone. She was no longer just an investigator, she was the game piece. Standing there in the dusty attic, the silence of the old house pressing in, Evelyn understood the true nature of the danger. The killer hadn't just forced her to dig up a grave. They had painted a target on her back, because the path to uncovering their elaborate, history-bound plan now led directly through her own suppressed trauma. The game had indeed entered its most dangerous phase, and the next move, she knew with bone-chilling certainty, would be aimed squarely at her. Chapter 6: The Architect's Blueprint. Leaving the oppressive silence of the Blackwood estate attic, Evelyn clutched the worn diary like a lifeline. The cold night air outside did little to dispel the chilling certainty that had settled in her bones. The killer's cryptic messages weren't random taunts, but deliberate instructions guiding her toward a buried truth only they understood. Now, back at the station and seated across from Corbin, the fragmented pieces clicked into place. The past murders, the hidden secrets, her own resurfacing memory, forming a dark, precise pattern. She understood. They were following a terrifying blueprint, meticulously recreating history, and she held a vital key. The Blackwood Creek Police Department felt strangely still. The usual low hum of the antiquated PCs and the occasional crackle of the radio, muted by the sheer weight of what they had uncovered. Dust motes danced in the weak fluorescent light as Evelyn laid out her findings on the scarred surface of Corbin's desk. Photocopies of the 1978 case files, crumpled photos of the current victims and their macabre staging, and printouts of the Historical Society records detailing the Markham/Davies incident. "It's not just recreation," Evelyn stated, her voice steady despite the tremor that still lingered deep within her from the attic. "It's a performance, a ritual. And it's following a script based on 1978. Corbin leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his initial skepticism worn thin by the undeniable parallels and the increasingly personal nature of the case. He listened intently, his gaze fixed on the array of evidence. "Okay, blueprint," he echoed. "Talk me through it. You said the first victim matched the second from 78, the second matched the third. What about the first 78 victim, Markham? And the fourth, if there was one?" "Exactly," Evelyn confirmed, pushing a photograph of Peter Jenkins forward. Peter Jenkins, current victim 1, was staged like Sarah Jenkins, 78 victim 2. The second victim, found at the mill like 78 victim 3, a man named David Davies. The placement of the body, the symbolic items, bone effigies for the mill victim, bird carvings for Peter, they mirror the details from the original case files precisely. This killer isn't just mimicking, they're sequencing. They're enacting the 1978 murders in an order that seems to follow a twisted logic, perhaps related to the killer's own asterisk perception of events, or maybe the asterisk impact of those deaths on the town. She tapped the photo of the Markham/Davies confrontation from the historical archives. The first woodsman victim in 1978 was Old Man Markham. If this killer, the archivist, as we've tentatively called them, is truly following a blueprint, then the first historical victim, Markham, must be represented somewhere. Perhaps he's the starting point, the inciting incident that the killer is referencing, even if the first current victim wasn't staged identically to him. "Why skip the first one in the staging sequence then?" Corbin mused. "Maybe they see Markham's assault not as a woodsman murder, but the event that triggered everything," Evelyn suggested. "The original sin, as Tom called it, the event the town buried. The killer's target isn't just individuals, it's the town itself. They're using these murders to expose the cover-up, to force Blackwood Creek to confront what it hid." "And the symbols, the folklore elements?" Corbin asked, pointing to a drawing of a corrupted ward symbol. "They're part of the ritual," Evelyn explained. "They're taking protective symbols meant to ward off ill fortune or outsiders, and twisting them, inverting them. It's a statement that the town's attempts to protect itself by hiding the truth have failed. The symbols aren't protection anymore, they're markers of guilt, of complicity." Evelyn paused, taking a breath. "And the messages, they're not random taunts. They're part of the blueprint too, each one directed at me. The Haze remembers, coming home, whispering in the pines, linking me to the past. Then the dust remembers, the floorboards groan, find the ghost in the attic, leading me directly to the diary, to my suppressed memory of witnessing something from 1978. Corbin's expression hardened. "So the killer knew you had that memory, knew it was in the house, knew it was in the attic." They knew, Evelyn confirmed, a chill tracing its way up her spine. This isn't just someone who read the old case files. This is someone with intimate knowledge of Blackwood Creek, the events of 1978, the layout of my childhood home, and my own past. The archivist is intelligent, meticulous, patient, and deeply, personally connected to those events. They feel wronged by the cover-up, perhaps directly or indirectly, and they see me, for some reason, as central to unraveling it. Or perhaps as someone who needs to be punished for forgetting, for leaving. Corbin ran a hand over his tired face. So, this blueprint, what's the next step on it? Another victim staged like, who? The fourth woodsman victim? Evelyn shook her head slowly. There wasn't a recorded fourth woodsman victim in 78, not officially. The murders stopped after Davies, but the blueprint isn't just about the victims. It's about the asterisk story the killer wants to tell, the truth they want to reveal. The next move might not be another body. It might be something designed to expose a key secret, force a confession, or directly target someone who is getting too close. She didn't need to say who that someone was. The air in the small office grew heavy with unspoken dread. Hours later, the oppressive silence of the old Blackwood estate felt even more suffocating. The fog outside had thickened, pressing against the grimy window panes like a ghostly shroud. Evelyn had returned, utterly drained from the day's analysis and the weight of the resurfacing memories. She needed to be in the house to feel its history, perhaps to understand the context of the diary's fragmented images. She locked the door behind her, the click echoing unnaturally in the vast, empty foyer. A floorboard creaked upstairs, a sound she'd come to expect from the old house settling. But tonight, it felt different. Louder, more deliberate. Evelyn froze, listening. The house remained silent for a moment, then another creak sounded from the landing above. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She hadn't heard a car outside, hadn't seen anyone. She delocked the door. Hadn't she? Slowly, silently, she moved toward the foot of the grand, decaying staircase. The shadows clung to the corners, deepening the gloom. She reached the bottom step, peering up into the darkness. Nothing, just the oppressive silence and the phantom sounds of the old house. "Hello," she called out, her voice barely a whisper. Silence. Taking a deep breath, Evelyn began to ascend the stairs, each creak of wood under her feet a thunderclap in the quiet. She reached the landing, her eyes scanning the hallway. The doors to the various rooms stood open or slightly ajar, just as she'd left them. No sign of forced entry on the landing window. Had she imagined it? Just the house playing tricks? She continued down the hall towards her bedroom. As she neared the door, her foot brushed against something on the threadbare runner carpet. She stopped, looking down. Lying just outside her bedroom door was a small, intricately carved wooden bird. It was identical to the one found at Peter Jenkins' crime scene, only this one was painted a deep, unsettling shade of black. And tucked beneath its claw, pinned to the carpet by a shard of wood, was a small, folded piece of paper. Evelyn's breath hitched. The paper wasn't there when she'd left. This wasn't the house settling, it was a message. Her hands trembling, she knelt, carefully retrieving the paper and the carving. The black bird felt cold, slick under her fingers, imbued with a malevolent stillness. Unfolding the paper, she saw familiar, precise block lettering. The message was short, chillingly direct. "You remember the whispering now? The blueprint is complete. The house holds the final piece. Don't you dare forget again." A cold dread washed over her, deeper than the fog outside. He hadn't just left a message, he had been asterisk inside the house. Inside her asterisk house. He knew she had the diary, knew it had triggered the memory, knew she was piecing things together. This wasn't a taunt, it was a confirmation. And a warning. The house felt violated, its oppressive atmosphere now charged with a palpable sense of trespass. He had been here, watching her, waiting for her to find the diary. He had left his calling card, a physical manifestation of the terror, right outside her private space. She backed away from the door, the black bird and the message clutched in her hand like venomous things. She needed to call Corbin. Now, even with Corbin's presence, the house felt tainted. He arrived quickly, his face grim as Evelyn showed him the bird carving and the message. He secured the scene, though there wasn't much of one, just the symbolic placement, and took photos, his movements efficient but his gaze often flicking towards Evelyn, concern etched into his features. "No sign of forced entry," Corbin confirmed, checking windows and doors downstairs. He must have used a spare key, or maybe there's a way in we don't know about. Or he was in here waiting when you left this morning. The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through Evelyn. He was in here, he knew about the attic, about the diary, he knew what I found. He's escalating, Corbin stated, his jaw tight. Making it personal, violating your space. He looked at the black bird still resting on the table where Evelyn had placed it, its painted eyes seeming to stare. This is a direct threat, Evelyn. You're not just investigating the case anymore, you are part of the case. The target. The truth of his words landed heavily. Evelyn sank onto the worn sofa, the adrenaline beginning to recede, leaving behind a raw, aching vulnerability. Her carefully constructed composure, the professional distance she maintained in her work, felt shattered. This wasn't an abstract case study, it was her life, her past, being weaponized against her. He wants me to remember, she whispered, not just to Corbin but to the echoing silence of the house. He's pushing me. And the pushing worked. The black bird, the message, the violation of her home, it cracked something open inside her. Fragments of memory, previously fleeting and disjointed, surged forward with terrifying intensity. The whispering in the pines. It wasn't just a phrase, it was a sound. A low, sibilant murmur that seemed to weave through the trees, amplified by the fog, carrying secrets on the wind. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, trying to anchor herself. But the images came, unbidden, sharp, and painful. Pine needles thick on the forest floor, the smell of damp earth and something metallic, a sudden shout. Then scuffling, the sound of wood breaking, a figure falling, a heavy thud, shadows moving, indistinct faces running, small legs pumping, heart pounding, the gray wall of fog, disorienting, terrifying, the whispering following, seeming to mock, a small wooden bird carving, dropped beside a root, black eyes staring up, hiding behind a thick trunk, trembling. Trying to make sense of the chaos, the fear, the adult voices, hushed, urgent. Accident, keep quiet. Never tell anyone, the cold floor of the attic, dust, motes dancing, a small hand reaching for a chest, locking it away, pushing it down into the dark place where scary things went. The memories were fragmented, nonlinear, like shards of glass reflecting different angles of the same traumatic event. Faces were blurred, sounds muffled, but the emotional core was devastatingly clear. Fear, confusion, the overwhelming pressure to forget. Evelyn gasped, her hands flying to her head. It wasn't just old man Markham's assault she had witnessed. It was more. The bird carving, it was there. Was it left then? Or was it something the killer added now to link her memory to his blueprint? The voices, the urgency to cover it up, the accident lie it all fit. Corbin was by her side instantly, his hand resting lightly on her arm. Evelyn, are you okay? She opened her eyes, tears blurring her vision. It's coming back, she choked out. The memory, the whispering, it's more than just the fall. There were others, adults, and the bird was there. Her body trembled uncontrollably, the emotional toll immense. This wasn't objective analysis. This was her childhood trauma ripped open, weaponized by a killer who seemed to know her better than she knew herself. She felt exposed, terrified, and utterly alone in the face of this deeply personal horror. The blueprint wasn't just a map of past crimes, it was a map of her own buried consciousness. The next day dawned gray and damp, the fog still clinging stubbornly to Blackwood Creek. The violation of Evelyn's home hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of the killer's reach. While Corbin pursued leads on potential suspects with keys to the estate or access to old records, Evelyn felt an urgent need to speak to Tom again. His knowledge of the town's secrets, particularly the Markham/Davies cover-up, was crucial. And his hesitant admission about his grandfather's involvement now felt chillingly relevant in the context of the blueprint. She found him at the Foggy Anchor, polishing glasses behind the bar, his usual easy smile conspicuously absent. His movements were jerky, his eyes darting nervously towards the door each time it opened. "Tom," Evelyn said, sliding onto a stool. He started, dropping a glass. It hit the mat with a dull thud but didn't break. "Evelyn, didn't hear you come in." He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Everything okay?" "Not exactly," she replied, her voice low. "Someone broke into the house last night, left me a message. They know about the diary, Tom, about what I found. Tom's face paled. He stopped polishing, his hands still. Broke in? Are you serious? Are you okay? I'm fine, physically, Evelyn said, but they knew exactly what they were doing. They knew I was looking into 78, that I'd found the diary. Tom, we talked about the cover-up, about your grandfather pressuring Sarah Jenkins. What else aren't you telling me? His defensive walls snapped into place instantly. What's that supposed to mean? I told you what I know. My grandfather made a mistake. The town council made a mistake. They wanted to avoid a feud, keep the peace. Keep the peace or bury the truth? Evelyn pressed, her voice sharp. The killer is following a blueprint based on those events. They know about the cover-up, they're exposing it piece by piece. And they clearly know things only someone deeply connected to that time, someone in the know, would know. Tom slammed the cloth onto the counter, his eyes flashing with a mixture of fear and anger. Are you accusing me, Evelyn? Is that what this is? I'm saying you're holding back, she countered calmly, though her heart ached at his reaction. You know more about what really happened that night. About the timeline, about who was there, about who else might have been involved in the cover-up besides the council. The message mentioned the house and the final piece. Does that mean anything to you? Something connected to 1978? He turned away, his shoulders hunched, running a hand through his hair. Look, Evelyn, I told you everything I could. It's dangerous digging this stuff up. People in this town, they don't like it, my family. My grandfather's memory. Tom, people are dying because of these secrets. Evelyn insisted, leaning forward. If you know something that can stop this, you have to tell me. He whirled back around, his expression strained, almost desperate. You think I don't know that? You think I like what's happening? But you don't understand how deep this goes, Evelyn. Some things are buried for a reason. His eyes held a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher, not just fear, but perhaps guilt or regret. His defensiveness was palpable, his usual open demeanor replaced by a guarded, almost volatile tension. He was clearly under immense pressure, either from the killer's actions, from knowing more than he'd revealed, or perhaps both. Is the final piece in the house? She asked again, pushing softly. Is it something the killer thinks is there, something from 78? Tom hesitated, his gaze dropping to the counter. He ran a finger along its worn surface, a muscle twitching in his jaw. For a moment, Evelyn thought he might break, might finally confide the full extent of his secrets. But then he shook his head, a hard, decisive motion. Evelyn left the pub, the heavy silence pursuing her more effectively than any sound. Tom Miller's guarded eyes, the secrets he clutched close, felt less like roadblocks now and more like confirmation that she was right on the edge, that the killer's horrifying blueprint was terrifyingly close to its final, dreadful stage. The pieces were all on the board, scattered across the town's history, her own fractured past, and the cryptic warnings of others. She could feel the air growing colder, the web tightening, knowing the final step was imminent. All that remained was the spark, the single, crucial insight that would connect everything, revealing the final destination of the killer's design. It would come, she knew, triggered by a forgotten memory, a key phrase from Tom, or a detail hidden in plain sight. And when it did, there would be no time for hesitation. The path illuminated by the completed blueprint would lead her directly into the heart of the shadow, to the place where the archivist waited, and where the terrifying truth behind everything would finally be laid bare. Chapter 7. The Shadow's Lair, Climax Part 1. Back at the police station, the weight of Tom Miller's guarded secrets still pressed heavily on Evelyn, a palpable counterpoint to her analytical mind. Poring over the evidence photos one last time with Corbin, the twisted ward symbols and the sequence of victims finally clicked into place with a sickening inevitability. It wasn't merely a recreation of the Woodsman murders, but a horrific performance following a hidden stage play, leading directly to a specific, final location. A place the town had tried to bury deeper than anything else. The sudden, chilling certainty left no room for hesitation. The killer's lair, the shadow's lair, was now terrifyingly clear, demanding they act immediately. The stale air of the Blackwood Creek Police Department felt heavier than usual. Outside, the fog had thickened again, muffling the world and casting long, distorted shadows even indoors. Evelyn stood beside Corbin's desk, scattered with reports and crime scene photos, her finger tracing the lines of a faded map of the town and surrounding woods. Tom's fear, his hushed warning about the final piece. The blackbird left at the estate, the fragments of her own memory, they coalesced into a terrifying certainty. "Look at this, Miles," Evelyn said, her voice low but urgent. The victim sequence, first Peter Jenkins mirroring Sarah, then the second victim mirroring the third woodsman victim. It's not just recreation, it's a narrative. The killer, the archivist, is performing the events that led to the town's cover-up, and then forcing us to confront the location where that history is truly stored. Corbin leaned in, his brow furrowed with weary skepticism, yet his eyes held a flicker of hope. "Stored? What are you saying? Like their hideout?" "More than that. Think about the messages. The Haze remembers. Go home, look closer. The blueprint is complete, the house holds the final piece." He led me to the diary, to my buried memory of witnessing the assault. The final piece isn't just information in the house, it's the asterisk catalyst that points to where the full asterisk blueprint, the full archive of his grievance, is kept. The house is where the initial trauma occurred or was witnessed. The archive is where the subsequent cover-up and vengeance were planned. She tapped the map, pointing to the old abandoned mill. The second victim was found there, but it's more than just a dumping ground or a stage. Remember the third woodsman victim, the one the second victim here mirrored. That victim was supposedly tied to the mill in some way, according to Silas Croft's vague comments about accidents and keeping quiet. She paused, connecting the strands. The mill isn't just a location asterisk for asterisk a crime. I think it's the location of the archivist. It's derelict, isolated, large enough to hide things. And it's intrinsically tied to one of the original buried events or victims. Corbin straightened, the skepticism fading, replaced by a dawning, grim understanding. "You think the killer is based there, using the mill as their headquarters there, archive?" "Yes. The pattern, the victims, the messages leading me to the diary, the bird. The archivist isn't just showing us the past, he's showing us his interpretation of it, curated and stored. The mill is the perfect place for that kind of isolated, obsessive work. It's the shadow's lair." A gust of wind rattled the police station windows, and the fog outside seemed to press even closer. Sheriff Brody entered the room, rubbing his temples. "Fog's getting worse out there. Visibility 0 in the woods. Any progress?" Evelyn looked at Corbin, then back at the map. "Sheriff, we think we know where he is, the abandoned mill." Brody looked dubious. "The mill? We searched it after the second body." "Not thoroughly enough for a hidden space, a base of operations," Evelyn countered, her urgency mounting. "He's been leading us, taunting us, showing us the pieces. The blueprint he spoke of, the archive of his life's work and grievance, it has to be there. It's the only location that fits the pattern and the narrative he's constructing." Okay, Brody said, sensing the shift in Evelyn's tone. "We'll organize a team. Takes time with this fog, though, gets vehicles stuck, men lost." "Time is what we don't have," Evelyn cut in, the memory of the blackbird outside her door a cold knot in her stomach. "The message said the blueprint is complete. That means the final act is imminent. He's pulled me in, he's shown me my part of the past. He's waiting, he won't wait long." Corbin looked at the clock, then at the swirling gray outside. The local force was small, and navigating the fog-choked roads and treacherous woods would indeed take critical time. Backup from outside Blackwood Creek would be hours away. He made the decision instantly, a grim determination settling on his face. "Sheriff, send a car to wait on the main road near the turnoff," Corbin said. "But Evelyn and I are going in now. We can navigate the paths faster on foot closer to the mill. If he's there, we need to move before he knows we've made the connection." Brody hesitated, but the look in Corbin's eyes, mirroring the desperate certainty in Evelyn's, told him it wasn't up for debate. "All right, be careful. Radio silence until you're inside. Don't want him hearing chatter if he's monitoring anything." Evelyn nodded, her heart pounding, a mix of dread and a strange, cold resolve washing over her. This was it. The haze of the past, the whispering in the pines, the buried secrets, they were leading her directly into the shadow's lair. The drive to the general vicinity of the abandoned mill was a tense, surreal journey through a world reduced to immediate headlights and swirling, spectral gray. The fog was a living entity, pressing against the car windows, obscuring everything beyond a few feet, making the familiar roads alien and dangerous. Corbin drove slowly, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, while Evelyn stared out, the world outside the glass an impenetrable wall of mist. "Can't see a damn thing," Corbin muttered, his voice tight. "Makes you feel like you're driving blind. Or maybe like the town itself is trying to stop us." "It wouldn't be the first time Blackwood Creek tried to bury something," Evelyn said softly, the words tasting like ash. The image of the black bird, stark against the wood of her doorframe, flashed in her mind. And the memory fragments, the fallen man, the watching figures, the terrifying asterisk sound she couldn't quite grasp, the whispering. It was all tied together, a knot of trauma and secrecy. "You think he knows we're coming?" Corbin asked. "Maybe. He seems to anticipate our moves, leading me with the messages. But the fog, it cuts both ways. It isolates him, yes, but it also hinders anyone getting to him. And it protects our approach, makes it stealthier, at least initially." The car tires crunched onto the gravel shoulder as Corbin pulled over near the overgrown, barely visible access path that led towards the mill and the creek. The air outside was bone-chillingly damp, thick with the smell of wet earth, decaying leaves, and the faint, metallic tang of the creek. They got out, the silence of the fog-bound world broken only by their hushed breaths and the distant, disorienting sound of dripping water. Corbin checked his weapon, a practiced, quiet movement. "Ready?" he asked, looking at Evelyn. His eyes, usually weary and cynical, were sharp now, focused. He wasn't just following a lead, he was protecting her. "Ready as I'll ever be," Evelyn replied, pulling her coat tighter. She wasn't a detective or a soldier. She was a psychologist, armed with analysis and intuition. But this killer had made it personal, dragged her back into her childhood nightmare. She wouldn't back down now. "He wants me there, Miles. He's planned this. The archive, it's probably not just about the town. It's about me, too." They started walking, the narrow path swallowed almost immediately by the fog, the dense, dripping woods closing in around them. Each snap of a twig, each rustle of leaves, was amplified in the muffled air, setting nerves on edge. The whispering in the pines wasn't just a memory. In the fog, it felt like the woods themselves were whispering secrets. Navigating by instinct and the faint memory of the path, they moved through the oppressive mist. The air grew colder as they approached the creek, the sound of flowing water a low murmur beneath the silence. Then, looming out of the gray, the abandoned mill appeared, a skeletal silhouette against the foggy backdrop. It was a sprawling structure of decaying wood and rusted corrugated iron, perched precariously on the banks of Blackwood Creek. Broken windows gaped like empty eye sockets, and sections of the roof had collapsed, leaving dark voids open to the sky. Ivy and moss clawed at the walls, trying to reclaim the derelict building. It looked like the ruins of something vast and forgotten, perfectly suited to harbor dark secrets. They approached cautiously, staying low, using the fog and the cover of the scattered debris around the mill's exterior. There were no lights visible, no sounds emanating from within except the groan of the structure in the wind and the persistent gurgle of the creek. "See anything?" Corbin whispered, his hand resting on his weapon. Evelyn scanned the exterior. "No obvious signs. Wait." Her gaze fixed on the main entrance, a wide, open maw leading into the dark interior. On the ground just outside, partially obscured by a fallen beam, was something dark and small. They crept closer. It was another black wooden bird carving, identical to the one left at her door, its smooth, dark surface absorbing the little light available. It was placed deliberately like a marker. "He knows," Evelyn breathed. "He left this. He knew we'd find it. It's another message." Corbin crouched, examining the bird but didn't touch it. His eyes flicked to the open doorway. Or he just finished placing it and is still inside. "Let's move." They entered the mill, stepping over the threshold from the damp, foggy exterior into the echoing, dust-choked darkness within. The air inside was cold, stagnant, thick with the smell of mildew, decay, and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, the lingering scent of blood, or perhaps chemicals used to clean it away. Dust motes danced in the narrow shafts of light that pierced the broken windows high up. The floorboards groaned ominously under their weight, a sound that seemed deafening in the silence. The sheer size of the interior was disorienting, vast open spaces where machinery once stood, now filled with rusted relics, piles of rotting wood, and shadows that seemed to coil and writhe in the gloom. "Stick together," Corbin murmured, drawing his weapon. "My light's minimal, don't want to give away our position." They moved slowly, carefully, deeper into the heart of the mill, guided only by the faint light filtering in and the low beam of Corbin's flashlight sweeping across the debris-strewn floor. Each step was a gamble, each shadow a potential threat. They explored the ground floor, finding nothing but decay and disuse. The scale of the place was immense, a labyrinth of broken walls and fallen structures. Evelyn's mind raced, trying to think like the archivist. Where would someone build a secret archive in a place this size? Not in the open, not where it could be easily stumbled upon. A smaller, hidden space. They found a set of rickety stairs leading upwards, shrouded in deeper darkness. Hesitantly, they ascended, the stairs groaning under their weight as if protesting their intrusion. The upper levels were just as dilapidated, but sections felt different. Less dust, less outright collapse in certain areas. It was on the third level, tucked away in a section partitioned off by hastily erected plywood walls, that they found it. A room, not large but distinct from the surrounding ruin. The plywood walls were rough, but they created a contained space. The air here was different too, drier, almost charged with a strange energy. Corbin used his flashlight, and the beam swept across what lay within. It was the archivist's lair. The walls were plastered with newspaper clippings, faded headlines from 1978 screaming about the Woodsman murders alongside recent articles about the new victims. There were maps of Blackwood Creek, marked with locations. The woods where Sarah Jenkins was found, the mill, the old Blackwood estate. Photos were pinned up, police evidence photos of the original victims, grainy images of the current crime scenes, and chillingly, photographs of Evelyn herself, taken recently, unknowingly. There was a large desk, salvaged and cleaned, covered in notebooks filled with dense, obsessive handwriting. Drawings chillingly similar to the one in Evelyn's diary, depicting the assault, the victims, the symbols. Charts mapping the phases of the moon, the dates of the murders, the weather conditions. And the archive itself, shelves filled with meticulously organized items. Wooden bird carvings, bone effigies, small jars containing dried earth or dark substances, twisted protective charms. And among them, objects clearly taken from the crime scenes, or perhaps from the victims themselves, a faded scarf, a broken watch, a small mud-caked toy soldier. Trophies. On the desk lay a bound manuscript, its pages filled with more handwriting. A manifesto. Evelyn's eyes scanned the title, The Weight of the Haze, A Reckoning. It was all here, the detailed blueprint. The chilling evidence of the killer's meticulous planning, their twisted rationale, their deep-seated grievance rooted in the past. The archivist was not just recreating the murders, he was *living them, curating their history, forcing the town and Evelyn to witness the truth he believed had been buried. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by their ragged breathing. The sheer scale of the obsession was overwhelming, sickening. "My God," Corbin whispered, his voice hoarse. "He's been living here, planning this, for years." Evelyn stepped closer to the desk, her gaze fixed on a page in one of the notebooks. It wasn't just about the town's cover-up. There were entries detailing her own life, her leaving Blackwood Creek, her career as a psychologist, her return, and entries about the estate, about the attic, about her father, and references to the whispering in the pines. He knew everything. He had engineered her return, used her house, her memories, her trauma, as part of his elaborate, horrifying stage play. This wasn't just a killer. It was a director, a historian, a judge, obsessed with the past and determined to mete out justice, his own twisted version of it. The grievance wasn't just the covered-up assault. It was the asterisk act of burying the truth, the town's collective amnesia and complicity. And Evelyn, by leaving and then being drawn back, represented that buried history, the trauma that refused to stay hidden. Just as the weight of the archive pressed down on them, a sound echoed through the mill below, the distinct scrape of a shoe on wood. They froze. He was here. Footsteps began ascending the stairs, slow, deliberate, unafraid. Corbin raised his weapon, positioning himself between Evelyn and the doorway, his stance tense. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Her mind, honed for analysis, was now grappling with pure, primal fear, mixed with a cold, clinical assessment of the situation. How could she use her understanding of his pathology against him? The footsteps reached the landing outside the plywood room. They stopped. A moment of suffocating silence stretched, punctuated only by their shallow breaths. Then a figure appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the slightly lighter gloom of the mill interior beyond. Not large, not overtly menacing in form, but radiating an aura of chilling calm and calculated purpose. As the figure stepped fully into the room, the low beam of Corbin's flashlight caught his face. Evelyn gasped, a choked sound of pure shock and disbelief. It was Tom Miller, her childhood friend. The man who had offered comfort at the pub, who had hinted at secrets and warned her to be careful. His usually kind eyes were cold, distant, filled with a strange, righteous fire. He wasn't holding a weapon, but his presence in this room, among this archive of death and obsession, was more terrifying than any blade or gun. "Hello, Evelyn," Tom said, his voice quiet, almost gentle, utterly devoid of the warmth she knew. It was the voice of a stranger. "Welcome. I knew you'd find it eventually. I built this place, this archive, specifically for you to see." Corbin kept his weapon trained on him. "Miller, don't move." Tom barely glanced at Corbin, his focus solely on Evelyn. "It's Detective Corbin, isn't it? You've been persistent, but this is between me and Evelyn. This has always been about Evelyn." "Tom, why?" Evelyn stammered, her mind reeling, trying to reconcile the friend with the killer, the archivist. A faint smile touched Tom's lips, devoid of humor. "Why?" "Look around, Evelyn. This is the truth. The truth they buried here in this town, in this mill, in asterisk her asterisk memory." He gestured around the room at the photos, the documents, the manifesto. They tried to forget. They built their lives on a lie, on the silence of those who witnessed the rot. But the Haze remembers Evelyn, and I am its architect. He stepped further into the room, seemingly unconcerned by Corbin's gun. They covered up what the Markhams did to old man Markham. They silenced Sarah Jenkins because she saw it. They ignored the Woodsman murders when they started because it threatened to expose their lies. And they let it all fester, generation after generation, whispering about it but never speaking asterisk it. His gaze intensified, fixing on Evelyn. "And you, Evelyn, you were there, you saw it too. Not just the assault, but the aftermath. You saw them, the adults, your parents among them perhaps, gathered near where he fell, near the pines, trying to fix it, trying to bury it. And you heard it, didn't you? The whispering." Evelyn's blood ran cold. He knew. He knew about the specific, terrifying memory that had haunted her, the memory of something more than just the assault, something tied to the adults, to the cover-up itself. "You ran, Evelyn," Tom continued, his voice laced with a subtle bitterness. "You ran from the haze, from the truth, from the whispering. You became this successful psychologist, analyzing other people's trauma, while yours festered, buried deeper than anyone else's. The ghost in the attic was always asterisk your asterisk memory, Evelyn, your suppressed truth. I needed you to find it again. I needed you to remember." His words settled over Evelyn like a shroud, heavy with dread and a chilling certainty. The final piece. The town's buried memory made flesh. He hadn't just revealed her past. He had laid bare her inextricable role in this twisted theater, casting her as the lead in a tragedy she didn't remember, couldn't escape. She was caught, exposed, the last secret weapon in his arsenal of truth and violence, her own shattered mind the key to his grim finale. The archivist took another step, not just forward, but into the space that separated explanation from execution. The archive of Blackwood Creek's sins loomed behind him, the air thick with dust and the potent tang of coming violence. The time for words was over. His eyes, burning with righteous fury and something infinitely colder, promised that the reckoning he spoke of would not be a quiet unveiling. It would be a tearing apart, a brutal confrontation where the past would finally, horrifyingly, consume the present and Evelyn would be forced to witness, and perhaps become, the ultimate price of Blackwood Creek's truth. Chapter 8. The Truth Unveiled, Climax Part 2. As Tom Miller took that final step, the air in the archivist's lair crackled, shedding its dust and the weight of revelation for the potent tang of imminent violence. His gaze, fixed solely on Evelyn, promised the reckoning would be brutally physical, tearing not just secrets but flesh, making her the focal point of his final, desperate act. Caught between the overwhelming evidence of a town's sins and the terrifying reality of her own central role, Evelyn felt the fragile pause before the storm broke. Beside her, a different kind of tension coiled, the quiet readiness of protection mirroring the chilling certainty of attack. "Evelyn," Tom breathed, his voice devoid of the warmth she remembered, replaced by a chilling clinical edge. "You found it, just as I knew you would." He gestured around the room, the vast, chaotic collection of pain and obsession. "This is it, the weight of the haze, everything they buried, everything they forgot." He took another slow step forward, his hands loose at his sides, but his body taut, ready to spring. He was no longer the slightly hesitant, friendly Tom of the foggy anchor. He was the archivist, the meticulous architect of this macabre performance. "Why me, Tom?" Evelyn managed, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor that ran through her limbs. She consciously tapped into her professional training, the need to understand the why overriding the primal urge to flee. Her mind raced, analyzing his posture, his tone, the shift in his eyes, the chilling certainty of a man fulfilling his twisted purpose. "Why involve me?" "The messages, my home, my diary?" Tom's lips curved into a tight, humorless smile. "Why you, Evelyn? Because you were there, you saw, you heard the whispering in the pines, just like Sarah, but you buried it, you forgot. Or worse, you chose asterisk to forget. You are the living embodiment of Blackwood Creek's refusal to face itself." He swept a hand towards the manuscript on the desk. "They buried the assault on Old Man Markham. They buried Sarah Jenkins for seeing it. They buried the others who tried to speak up or who were simply inconvenient. And then, the town buried asterisk you and your memory, just another inconvenient truth stuffed into the attic of a decaying house." He advanced again, closing the distance. The air grew thicker, colder. The metal scent wasn't just from the old mill machinery now, it felt closer, sharper. "This," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, full of intense malice, "is about forcing the town to remember. About holding them accountable. And you, Evelyn, are the final piece. The catalyst. Your remembering isn't just personal, it's the key to unlocking the whole rotten structure." Evelyn's gaze flickered towards the door, towards the dark, empty stairwell behind Tom, then back to him. He was blocking the only obvious exit. She saw the intent in his eyes now, stark and terrifying. This wasn't just about forcing her to remember, it was about making her part of the final exhibit. "The blueprint," Evelyn said, trying to keep him talking, searching for any flicker of the man she knew, any psychological hook to exploit. "You said the blueprint was complete. What does that mean?" "It means," Tom said, raising his hand slightly, flexing his fingers, "that the story is finished. The victims represent the truth they buried. Peter Jenkins, Sarah's family, the man at the mill connected to the Davies. They are the echo of the past, brought back to demand recognition. And you are the ending, the truth unveiled with you as the sacrifice." He lunged. It happened in a blur. Tom moved with surprising speed, a desperate, honed intent in his movement. He reached for Evelyn, not in a casual grasp, but with a furious, grabbing motion aimed at her throat. But the moment was milliseconds too late. Detective Corbin was no longer a silent observer. He launched forward from beside Evelyn, his movement a practiced economy of force honed by years of training. "Police." "Stop!" Corbin's voice was a sharp, commanding bark that cut through the charged air of the Lair. He intercepted Tom's lunge, slamming into him with the force of his body weight. The impact was brutal, sending them both staggering sideways into the precariously stacked shelves of evidence. Paper, photos, and grim trophies rained down around them as they crashed against the wall. "Get out, Evelyn!" Corbin yelled, grappling with Tom, trying to gain control. Tom twisted, surprisingly strong and frantic. His face was contorted with rage, focused entirely on overcoming Corbin to get to Evelyn. He thrashed, swinging wild, powerful blows. Corbin ducked and blocked, trying to subdue him without resorting to deadly force if possible, but the space was confined, treacherous with debris, and Tom was fighting with the desperate strength of a cornered animal. Evelyn scrambled back, heart hammering against her ribs, but didn't flee down the stairs. Her mind, despite the terror, was already assessing. Corbin was holding his own, but Tom was relentless. The shelves had created a small, unstable barrier. As Tom landed a glancing blow on Corbin's jaw, making the detective stumble, Evelyn saw her chance. A heavy, bound book, perhaps another part of the manuscript, had fallen near her feet. Without thinking, she grabbed it, hefting its weight. As Tom turned his attention back towards her for a split second, taking advantage of Corbin's recovery, Evelyn swung the book with all her might, aiming for his side, the vulnerable area below the ribcage. The solid asterisk thwack echoed in the mill. Tom cried out, a sharp gasp of pain, and doubled over, his frantic energy momentarily broken. Corbin capitalized instantly, using the opening to grab Tom's arm and twist, driving him down to the floor. Down. Get down, Corbin yelled, using his weight to pin Tom. He wrenched Tom's hands behind his back, fumbling for his restraints. Tom still struggled, thrashing and grunting, but the force was fading. It's not over, Tom gasped, his voice strained. The truth, it's here for everyone. Just as Corbin clicked one handcuff into place, the sound of heavy boots thundering up the wooden stairs reached them, followed by the distinct, welcome voice of Sheriff Brody. Corbin, Evelyn. You okay? Brody's head appeared in the doorway, followed by two uniformed officers, weapons drawn. We got him, Sheriff, Corbin grunted, securing the second cuff. He's subdued. The officers flooded into the room, quickly assessing the scene. One moved to assist Corbin, while the other scanned the chaotic Lair. Brody's gaze swept over the room, the overturned evidence, Tom Miller now prone and handcuffed on the floor, and finally landed on Evelyn, who stood clutching the heavy book, trembling. Evelyn, are you hurt? Brody asked, rushing forward, concern etched on his face. No, she whispered, dropping the book with a thud. No, I'm okay. Okay wasn't the right word. She was raw, exposed. The room, now filling with the solid presence of police and the smell of ozone from their radios, still felt suffocating. The archive wasn't just evidence. It was Tom Miller's mind laid bare, and that mind was obsessed with her. As officers carefully began navigating the debris, securing the scene, and taking preliminary photos, Evelyn's gaze fell on the manuscript that had survived the struggle, lying open on the desk. The Weight of the Haze, A Reckoning. The title seemed to vibrate in the air. This wasn't just the killer's confession, it was the town's secret history, meticulously documented. An officer was cataloging the photographs that had been scattered. One photo, a grainy old snapshot, caught Evelyn's eye. It showed the base of a massive pine tree, dark against a foggy sky, and near it, a figure on the ground, obscured by shadow. Scattered around the figure were small, dark shapes. They looked like birds. Suddenly, the walls of the mill seemed to melt away. The dusty air was replaced by the damp, cold scent of the whispering woods. The sounds of police faded, replaced by the rustle of leaves underfoot, the snap of a twig. I was running, my feet clumsy on the tangled roots. Hide, don't let them see. She was small again, her legs pumping, heart hammering. She wasn't in the mill, she was at the edge of the woods, near the spot where the path twisted towards the creek. They were yelling. Loud, angry men's voices. And then a horrible sound. A thud, a cry. She froze, peering through the dense pines. She saw them now, silhouetted against the dim light filtering through the trees. Adults, men, several figures. One figure was on the ground. Birds, small, dark wooden birds scattered near the man on the ground. The details flooded back, sharp and sudden, tearing through the haze of years. It wasn't just a man falling. It was a struggle. Hands reaching, pulling, striking. Old man Markham. She saw his face, contorted in pain and fear, and she saw who was there. Faces she recognized, faces from the town, men she knew from the pub, from the general store, fathers of kids she went to school with, and the sound. It wasn't shouting anymore, it was low. Intense. Men huddled together, their voices hushed, urgent, whispering, planning, covering it up, making it disappear. And then they looked towards the trees, towards where she was hiding. Panic seized her. She didn't wait. She ran home, ran to her room, ran to her diary, trying to draw what she'd seen, trying to make sense of the terrifying, incomprehensible violence. The man falling, the birds watching, the whispering in the pines, and someone had seen her. One of them had seen the child peeking from behind the trees. One of them knew. The memory ripped through her, visceral and complete. It wasn't just old man Markham's assault. It was the immediate aftermath. The conspiracy formed right there in the woods, and she, a terrified child, had been a witness to the very beginning of the town's original sin. The sounds of the mill snapped back into focus. The chatter of the officers, Corbin's low voice giving instructions, Brody directing the scene. Evelyn swayed, putting a hand out to steady herself against a dusty shelf. The photo lay there, innocent-looking, yet it held the undeniable truth of her memory. Brody was speaking to her gently. "Evelyn, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." She had, the ghost of her 7-year-old self, hiding in the trees, watching the birth of a town's buried secret. Corbin finished speaking with an officer and came over, his expression weary but relieved. He saw her face, pale and drawn, the terror in her eyes. He followed her gaze to the photo on the floor. "Evelyn?" he asked softly. She nodded, unable to speak at first. Her throat was tight, her chest aching with a grief that wasn't just for the victims, but for the stolen innocence, the buried truth, the years lost to a trauma she hadn't even known she carried. "I saw it," she finally choked out, the words rough and heavy. "I saw it happen, or right after it happened. The assault, the men, the whispering they were planning, right there." She pointed a trembling finger at the photo. "I was there, hiding in the trees, just like my diary." The birds, they were symbols, protective wards, but they were scattering them like they were trying to cover it up, to erase it. Corbin's eyes widened as he pieced together the implication. Her suppressed memory wasn't just about witnessing an assault, it was about witnessing the immediate conspiracy, the first steps of the cover-up. And someone involved must have seen her. As the officers worked around them, cataloging the chilling archive, the full scope of Tom Miller's plan and connection became horrifyingly clear. His blueprint detailed not just the victims and the staging, but the players involved in the original incident and the cover-up. His family, the Millers, were part of the town council that buried the truth. His actions weren't just about general town corruption. They were a direct reckoning with his own family's complicity, using the descendants and symbols of the original players as his pawns and instruments. Tom had felt the crushing weight of his family's secret, the hypocrisy of their respectable facade built on buried violence and coercion. He had become obsessed with exposing it, using Evelyn, the child witness who was also conveniently the descendant of another Old Town family, and a psychologist skilled in uncovering buried truths, as his unwitting key. He knew about her diary, about the house, about the ghost in the attic because his family, or someone connected to them, had known about the child in the woods. They might have even kept track of her, of the house. The physical storm had passed, leaving Blackwood Creek raw and exposed under a hesitant sky. The chaos outside stilled, replaced by the hushed, urgent movements of police and the dawning realization across the town of the monstrous secrets unearthed. But for Evelyn, the real storm raged within. The fight for survival had ended the moment the handcuffs clicked shut, yet the battle for her soul had only just begun. She stood amidst the wreckage of Blackwood Creek's lies, the truth a leaden weight in her gut, the resurrected memories a searing brand. She was no longer fighting a killer, but grappling with the ghosts of a past she had unknowingly carried for decades, now violently brought to light. The silence that followed was not peace, but a heavy, expectant quiet. There were statements to be made, questions to answer, and the difficult, necessary task of facing the broken pieces left behind, not just of the town, but of her own life, her relationships, the very ground beneath her feet. The path ahead was not clear, but obscured by the lingering fog of trauma and revelation. Yet, the need to move forward, to find a way to live in this newly revealed world, pulled at her. It would be a long journey, a painful reckoning, one that required navigating the ruins of Blackwood Creek's past and her own, step by arduous step, towards a horizon she could only just begin to see through the clearing haze. Chapter 9, Aftermath and Horizon. The heavy, expectant quiet that descended after Tom Miller's arrest settled deep within Evelyn's bones, a perfect mirror to the internal storm still raging. There was no time for the relief she had expected. The immediate aftermath demanded she articulate the trauma, the truth, and the twisted motives of the archivist for the official record. She sat in the fluorescent glare of the Blackwood Creek Police Department, the air thick with stale coffee and disinfectant, ready to give her statement, each word a difficult step on the arduous process of living with her resurrected past. This was where the true reckoning began, not in a physical struggle, but in the slow, painful work of dredging up words from the ruins of her psyche. Days blurred into a strange, liminal state within the confines of the Blackwood Creek Police Department. The immediate, adrenaline-fueled crisis had passed, replaced by the meticulous, weary work of documentation. Evelyn spent hours in a stark interview room, the details of the archivist's lair, the evidence, and the final confrontation spilling from her in a controlled, clinical stream. Detective Corbin was present, his initial skepticism long gone, replaced by a quiet respect and the steady hand of procedure. Sheriff Brody oversaw the process, his weariness etched deeper into his face than ever before. The staging of the scenes, Evelyn explained, her voice steady despite the tremor just beneath the surface, was a deliberate narrative. He wasn't just replicating the Woodsman murders, he was performing them in a sequence that culminated in exposing the town's complicity, the buried original sin of the Markham assault and the subsequent cover-up. She leaned forward, tapping a pen against her notebook. The victims weren't chosen at random. Peter Jenkins mirrored Sarah Jenkins, the witness silenced. The second victim mirrored the third 1978 victim, tied to the land dispute fallout. Tom's selection of victims and staging was precise, symbolic. She moved on to the psychological profile, sketching the portrait of Thomas Miller, the boy she had known, the man who became the archivist. His motives were deeply rooted in his family's involvement in the cover-up. The weight of the Haze manuscript wasn't just a historical record, it was a manifesto, a form of self-punishment for his family's legacy, and perhaps a perverse attempt at redemption by forcing the truth into the light. He saw himself as the town's conscience, albeit a brutally destructive one. Explaining his focus on her was the hardest part. He knew I was the child witness, the ghost in the attic with the buried memory. He saw me as the final piece, the living embodiment of the town's suppressed trauma. His messages, the bird carvings, leading me back to the estate, to the diary, it was all designed to force me to remember, to integrate my forgotten memory into his narrative, making me the unwilling catalyst for the town's reckoning. Corbin listened intently, occasionally interjecting with a clarifying question about the timeline or the symbolism. So, he used you to uncover the last layer of the truth? Precisely, Evelyn confirmed. He couldn't articulate the full truth himself, or perhaps he didn't believe anyone would listen. He needed a dramatic performance, a series of horrific acts to rip the veil away. And he needed the witness, the child who saw something, to finally validate it, to make the town look. Sheriff Brody sighed, running a hand over his tired face. It's going to rip this town apart. More than it already is. That was the point, Evelyn said quietly. He wanted the pain, the disruption. He believed it was necessary for healing. They discussed the legal process ahead for Tom, the charges, the likely investigation into the 1978 cover-up that would inevitably follow. The town's secrets, so carefully guarded for decades, were now splayed open for all the world to see. The names whispered about in fear were now part of police reports and court documents. Evelyn felt a strange mix of vindication. The truth was out, and profound sorrow for the shattered lives left in its wake, including Tom's. "You did good work, Dr. Hart," Corbin said, standing up. There was a different kind of formality to it now, a professional acknowledgement earned through shared terror and grim discoveries. "We couldn't have gotten him without you." "Thank you, Detective," Evelyn replied, feeling the weight of his words. She had survived, she had helped catch a killer, but the cost had been the brutal excavation of her own psyche. Leaving the station felt like shedding a skin. The air outside, while still carrying the damp chill of Blackwood Creek, felt less heavy than it had in weeks. The pervasive, disorienting fog seemed thinner, not gone, not yet, but receding, allowing glimpses of the valley floor, the distant hills. A few days later, Evelyn arranged to see Tom. It wasn't easy. The police were hesitant, and she herself wrestled with the complex tangle of emotions, betrayal, pity, sorrow for the friend lost to madness and history. They met in a small, sterile visitation room at the county holding facility outside Blackwood Creek. The room was neutral, bare, offering no comfort, no echo of childhood woods or shared secrets. Tom sat across from her, looking smaller, his eyes lacking the frenetic intensity they'd held in the archivist's lair. He was just Tom again, scarred by his actions, stripped of his grandiose purpose. "Evelyn," he said, his voice quiet, flat. "Tom," she replied, the name feeling strange on her tongue now. Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken accusations and shared history. Evelyn chose her words carefully. "Why, Tom? Why all of it? Why use me?" He finally looked up, meeting her gaze. They wouldn't listen. For decades, everyone knew, everyone whispered, "My grandfather, your parents' generation." They buried it all. Sarah saw. They silenced her before she could say anything. And you saw the aftermath, didn't you? You ran, you buried it too, just like them. His justification was chilling in its cold logic. "I thought if I made it undeniable, if I forced the truth out through the chaos, through you, maybe the town could finally breathe. Maybe we could stop pretending the Haze didn't exist." "But you hurt people, Tom," Evelyn said, her voice breaking slightly. "You killed them and you used me. You dragged me back here into my worst nightmare, forcing me to remember things I suppressed because they were traumatic." "It was necessary," he insisted, a flicker of the archivist's conviction returning, though weaker now. "The town needed to face its sin. You were the key, the buried memory. You had to unlock it." "At what cost?" Evelyn whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "To them, to me." "To us?" Tom looked away, his gaze fixed on the bare wall. "I'm sorry, Evelyn, truly, I didn't want to hurt you, but the blueprint, it needed the final piece. It needed the witness." There was no forgiveness in her heart, not yet, perhaps not ever. The betrayal ran too deep. He had seen her as a tool, a necessary component in his twisted plan, not a friend. His secrets hadn't just complicated the investigation, they had been weaponized against her. "Our friendship, Tom. It can't survive this," Evelyn said, stating the difficult truth. "What you did, hiding what you knew, manipulating the investigation, using my past, it's broken." He nodded slowly, accepting her words with a resigned slump of his shoulders. "I know," he paused. "They're going to dig everything up, aren't they? The council records, the families involved." "Yes," Evelyn confirmed. "The truth is out now, Tom, for all of it, for the victims, for the town, for the cover-up. Then maybe some good came of it," he murmured, sounding utterly defeated. Their conversation ended shortly after. There was nothing more to say. The shared burden was there, the knowledge of the dark history they were both inextricably linked to, but their paths diverged dramatically now. His led into the legal system, into consequence and confinement. Hers led, she hoped, away from the Haze, towards healing. Back in Blackwood Creek, the old Blackwood estate loomed under a sky that, for the first time in weeks, showed patches of pale gray instead of an unbroken white ceiling of fog. Evelyn stood at the end of the long, overgrown driveway, the house a silent, imposing presence against the backdrop of the whispering woods. It was no longer just a decaying house. It was a repository of trauma, a physical manifestation of the secrets she had suppressed and the terror she had just endured. The killer had used its very structure, its history, against her. She walked the familiar, creaking floorboards one last time. The dust motes danced in the shafts of weak sunlight that penetrated the grimy windows. She saw the spot where she'd found the diary, the attic stairs, the hallway outside her childhood bedroom where the blackbird carving had been pinned. Each corner held an echo, a ghost. But as she stood in the silence, something shifted. The raw terror of the last few weeks began to subside, replaced by a quiet determination. The house held the pain, yes, but it also held the proof. The proof of what she had seen, the proof that she hadn't imagined the whispering, the proof that the town's Haze was real but not unbreakable. This place was too heavy with the past. Keeping it would be tethering herself to the very trauma she needed to integrate, not live within. It needed to be free of her, and she needed to be free of it. It was time to let it go. She would put the estate on the market. Selling it wasn't running away. It was acknowledging that her future wasn't here, wasn't buried under dust and suppressed memories. It was a deliberate choice to build something new elsewhere, taking the lessons learned but leaving the physical weight behind. The house, like the town, would have to find its own way forward. The decision felt like a physical weight lifting from her shoulders. It wasn't healing. She knew that would be a long, arduous process, but it was a definitive step onto the path towards *healing. She packed her sparse belongings into her car, leaving the estate locked and silent behind her. The police had finished their sweep of the property, the house now just an empty shell awaiting its uncertain future. Driving away from Blackwood Creek, Evelyn kept her eyes on the road ahead. The fog was visibly thinner now, swirling in isolated pockets rather than a solid wall. The sun wasn't exactly breaking through, but the gray was lighter, less oppressive. She could see the shapes of the trees more clearly, the outline of the valley where the town was nestled. Blackwood Creek was behind her. It was forever a part of her story, the place where her past had collided violently with the present, forcing her to confront buried truths within the town and within herself. She had been a victim, a detective, and a catalyst. She had faced the archivist and the ghosts of 1978. She had retrieved the lost pieces of her memory, stitching them back into the fragmented narrative of her life. The trauma was real, a deep wound that would take time to scar over. The whispering in the pines would likely echo in her mind for years to come, but she had survived. She had helped bring a terrible truth to light. She was changed, undeniably, perhaps irrevocably, by the dark secrets of the town and the rediscovery of her own. But as she drove, she focused on the road stretching out before her. The horizon was scarred, marked by the knowledge she now carried, but it was also open. It was a horizon free from the suffocating embrace of Blackwood Creek's haze, leading her towards an uncertain but self-determined future. The past was confronted, the present crisis averted, and for the first time in a long time, Evelyn Hart dared to look towards the light, however faint it might be.